The special meeting of the Albany City Council will come to order. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call. Present.
Present.
Councilmember Moss.
Here.
Vice Mayor Wild.
Here.
Mayor Thompson.
Here. Next item.
General Plan Housing Element Update Review. Authorize staff to make final revision to the draft housing element and authorize submittal of the draft to the State Housing and Community Development Department for review. Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation that Council review the draft 2007 to 2014 housing element and comments received from the public and Commission. Authorize staff to make final revisions to the draft housing element. Authorize submittal of the draft to the State Housing and Community Development Department for review, and explore the use of former redevelopment boomerang funds for implementation for inclusionary and transitional housing policies and programs.
Staff, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'd like to begin by introducing to my left, Barbara Kautz is outside legal counsel with Goldfarb and Lippman in Oakland. She's an expert and has been representing the city in affordable housing matters for a number of years. And to my right, I'll turn over in just a moment to our general plan consultant, Barry Miller. The City Council authorized a contract with Barry at the beginning of the year to prepare an update to our general plan, including updating our general plan housing element, which is one of the chapters of the general plan. Barry has been working with us in the Planning and Zoning Commission over the last few months to pull together the draft housing element that is before you this evening. And I think what I'd like to do is just turn it over to Barry for a brief presentation, and then we can get to your questions, public comment, and so forth. So, Barry?
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, members of the council and members of the public. As Jeff said, I am Barry Miller, the consultant on the general plan update. And this evening, we're here to give you a progress report on the housing element and to seek your direction on next steps in submitting the element to the state for formal review. I have about a 10-minute presentation, and all three of us will be available to answer questions at the end. We also have time for comments from the public during this item. And there's a PowerPoint presentation to follow along. To recap, the general plan is comprised of 7 mandatory elements covering topics such as land use, transportation, and conservation. The city is now in the process of updating its 1992 general plan to address new issues and to look ahead to the year 2035. The housing element is one of the 7 mandatory parts of the general plan, and it includes goals, policies, and programs showing how Albany will meet the housing needs of its current and future residents. Although it's part of the general plan, this element stands on its own as a separate document. It's the only part of the general plan that's subject to review and certification by the state of California. Every city has to submit its housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for a compliance determination. The state reviews the document against a long and detailed checklist and determines whether it's legally compliant with various state housing laws. For the past 30 years or so, housing elements have been updated roughly on a 7 or 8 year cycle around the state. And during each cycle, every city and county is asked to demonstrate through their housing element that it has the capacity to accommodate its fair share of the regional housing needs. The city's fair share of the region's housing needs is determined through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA. The state identifies the total number of housing units needed in each part of California, which for the Bay Area is about 214,000 units for the current period of 2007 to 2014. The Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, uses a formula to allocate that total to the 100 cities and 9 counties in the Bay Area, taking into consideration factors like the size of the city, the amount of vacant land, the extent of population and employment growth, proximity to transit, et cetera. about 20% of the Bay Area's housing needs are expected to be accommodated in Alameda County, and about 1% of the Bay Area housing needs are allocated to the city of Albany. What you see on this slide is Albany's assignment for the previous period on the left, which was 1999 to 2006, the current period in the middle, which is 2007 to 2014, and the next period, which hasn't started yet, on the right, 2015 to 2022. So right now we're in that middle bar, the current period, which those numbers total 276 units of housing. It's roughly the same as it was the last time, and a little less than the assignment for the next period. Now, what this means is that Albany needs to demonstrate that it has enough land zoned for the construction of this number of housing units during this particular time period. The city itself is not responsible for building the housing. It must make the land available. The other thing you'll notice about the bar chart is that the housing assignment is broken down by income category, and for this period that is 64 very low income, 43 low, 52 moderate, and 117 above moderate. What the state does is it typically requires that land for the low and very low portion is zoned at multifamily densities to make the housing more affordable. Members of the council will be familiar with this process because it's been underway for a while. I mentioned that we're in that 2000 to 2014 cycle. The city actually started this process in 2008 with the goal of submitting its element by June 2009. The Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council had a number of study sessions on the housing element in 2008 and 2009, including a community workshop on housing sites in 2009. The city submitted a partial draft of the housing element to the state in August 2009, and the state provided comments back in October of 2009, so roughly 4 years ago. Unfortunately, this coincided with a series of staff reductions in the city and staff departures in the city, and a revised draft was not prepared right away. The process was restarted in 2012 with the general plan update, and at this point, a revised element has been prepared, including responses to the state's comments and additional changes to make the document stronger and more effective. What we need to do now is to resubmit the document to the state for formal review and then begin the process of responding to the state's comments so that the council can adopt the element in the next few months. Since the element is going to end up being adopted towards the end of this 2007 to 2014 period, much of what we're doing now is laying the groundwork for the next housing element, which will actually, the process to update that will begin right after this housing element is adopted, and that will cover an 8-year period, so there are more opportunities to implement housing programs during that next period. I'm going to just briefly recap what's in the housing element document. It consists of 6 chapters, and the content of each of these chapters is largely determined by the state. So if you pick up the housing element of most cities in the Bay Area, they'll roughly follow the same format. First, there's an introduction that explains what the element is. Second, there's an evaluation of the last housing element. In Albany's case, this is the 1992 housing element. So this chapter reviews each policy and action in that 1992 element and discusses how the city has done in carrying out the actions and producing housing. On each of the next chapters, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I have an individual slide coming up, so I'll go through those in just a moment. I did want to provide a reminder that the council did review chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in an earlier draft in 2009. So what we've done is updated those first 5 chapters and added that 6th chapter, which did not appear in the earlier draft. So chapter 3 is the needs assessment. We've made major changes to this chapter from what was in the 2009 draft. This is both to incorporate the 2010 census, which was not out yet when the 2009 draft was done, and also to respond to the state comments on that earlier draft. This chapter looks at how Albany's population is changing, the age distribution, how the city is becoming more diverse in terms of ethnic groups and languages. This also looks at changes in tenure, in other words, renters versus owners in the city. The composition of households. Quite a bit of this chapter focuses on persons with special housing needs, including seniors, persons with disabilities, extremely low income households, and homeless persons. This chapter also looks at the income characteristics of Albany residents, the amount of income that households spend on mortgages and rents. There's also an analysis of housing conditions in the city, including things like overcrowding, vacancy rates, and the physical condition of our housing. And finally, this section includes a discussion of energy conservation and the steps that can be taken to reduce energy costs, which can often be a significant part of housing costs. Chapter 4 of the housing element, which was also included in the 2009 document, provides an inventory of housing sites. And what you see on this slide is a rather complicated table from the chapter. I won't go into it in too much detail, but just to say the numbers in the first column indicate opportunities for housing serving all income levels. The numbers in the second column are primarily housing opportunities for moderate and above moderate, and then the third column are the totals. Each row describes a different type of housing opportunity in the city. So we have single-family lots, we have vacant land in the R2 district, underutilized R3 sites. Most of the housing potential in Albany is associated with vacant or underutilized sites in the San Pablo commercial and Solano commercial zoning districts. There's also potential for second units. And we've updated this chapter from the 2009 version to add a few housing sites that were not tallied earlier, and also to provide information on the current status of each site. Chapter 5 of the element is an assessment of housing constraints, and these are broadly divided into two categories. We have governmental constraints and non-governmental constraints. The chapter includes a detailed evaluation of Albany's zoning requirements, including attributes like height limits, lot coverage requirements, setback standards, parking requirements, and so forth. It looks at inclusionary housing rules, standards for secondary units, including parking standards, and requirements for emergency shelter and transitional housing. One of the short-term recommendations of this chapter is to amend the zoning code to make emergency shelter a permitted land use in the CMX, or Commercial Mixed-Use Zoning District. This will bring the city into compliance with state law, which now requires that shelters be allowed in at least one zoning district in the city without a use permit. This chapter also includes information on Albany's development fees, including our permitting fees, design review fees, and impact fees. It also looks at permitting procedures and the design review process. In terms of the non-governmental constraints, this chapter looks at financing and funding opportunities for housing, including the loss of redevelopment and its impacts, the availability of infrastructure, and the presence of environmental constraints such as flooding and steep slopes in the city. Chapter 6 of the housing element presents the goals, policies, and programs. So this is the new content that was missing from the last draft. There are 5 major goals corresponding to the topics listed here. Each of these goals is followed by a series of policies, and the policies are followed by specific action programs, some of which refer to ongoing activities that are already underway, and some of which are to be carried out by the city during the planning period. We've tried to be as realistic as possible in the action program, given that the element covers 2007 to 2014, and most of this planning period is behind us. There are a number of important steps to be taken in the next year. Even though there's only 1 year left in the planning period, there are important zoning changes to be made and changes related to communication and outreach to affordable housing developers. Briefly, the first goal that you see on this list addresses the conservation of existing housing, particularly affordable housing in the city. The second goal looks at housing production with a focus on housing that is affordable to low and very low income households. The third goal looks at the production of housing for persons with special needs, including seniors and persons with disabilities, the homeless, and others with extremely low incomes. The fourth goal is on reducing constraints, and the fifth goal looks at fair housing. 4 of the 5 goals that you see listed here also appeared in the last housing element from 1992. And as you see on the right, there are 44 policies and 36 programs identified to carry out these goals. I mentioned before that we had a number of opportunities for input in this process. We've had 4 Planning and Zoning Commission study sessions, including 3 in the last month alone. At each of these meetings, we've asked the Commission to review and discuss materials sent out the week before and provided an opportunity for public comment. We also held a community open house here on October 1st with about 40 attendees. Notes from those study sessions and from the open house are included with the staff report for this item as attachment 2. Some of the major comments received to date are highlighted on this slide, and I won't go through each of these individually, but I do want to point out that in the staff report for this item, we've included a summary of the major comments that came from the 5 public input opportunities that have been provided in the recent months. Some of these are from the Planning and Zoning Commission, some are from the public, some are from written correspondence, and some of the suggestions are excellent, but the concern in adding them all now is that the city has limited capacity to implement all of the suggestions by the end of the planning period. Many that can't be included now because simply there's only a year remaining will be incorporated in the next housing element, which covers the 2015 to 2022 period. So again, with 8 years of implementation time, there'll be additional opportunities. The other thing about that is it's teed up with the general plan update, which will look more broadly at the future of the city and land use changes. We're having this study session mainly to seek council direction on next steps. What we would like to do is get the draft housing element to HCD as soon as possible so that they can begin their review. Before we submit it, we may need to make minor changes to incorporate comments from the council tonight, as well as some of the ideas from the recent public meetings. Once the state receives the document, they will have 60 days to review it. During that time, we'll be completing an initial study and a negative declaration as required under the California Environmental Quality Act. So there's an initial study that will be prepared. We expect to get comments from the state back during mid to late December, and at that point, we will work with the state reviewers to respond to their written comments, and then we'll bring proposed revisions back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council for review and discussion. So there will be additional revisions and changes to the document. We hope to hold public hearings, or we hope that the Council can hold public hearings to adopt the element around January to February 2014. Ideally, the Council will be in a position to adopt the element by that time with changes reflecting the state's comments. As noted on this slide, we'll then move immediately into implementation as well as the preparation of the housing element for the next period. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, respond to comments, and Jeff
Does
and Barbara
anyone
here.
on the council have a question? We are, but if you have questions, you can ask them now. Comments we'll do later. Comments we'll do later.
I'd like to ask a question. Not so long ago, we adopted the One Bay Plan, which in a nutshell says we should be putting in housing along transit corridors. How does that interact with the housing element?
Well, the One Bay Area Plan really drives the housing element for the next period, for 2015 to 22. So the numbers that came out of this process preceded the Sustainable Community Strategy and all the legislation that required that. So Albany's numbers for the next period went up a little bit because this is a community in the Central Bay Area with fairly good transit access, and that's the reason the number was 276 in this period, and it's gone up to 338 for the next period. But for right now, it really doesn't have an impact directly.
For this current
for this current period.
Right now.
Right.
But for a future element, this will have some say as to where we find places or, what.
You'll see it in that regional housing needs allocation number. That's where the impact is most apparent, because that number is determined by how well situated the city is to accommodate growth without increasing driving, basically, without increasing vehicle miles. So if you're a city that has good transit, that's fairly dense and compact, that has bicycle access, you're in a better position to accommodate growth than a city that's sprawling on the edge of the region.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
So there have been sites that are identified so that we would meet our requirement. How easy is it to add other sites in the future? Let's say we don't do it right now, but for the new go-round, There are some specific neighborhood or places along San Pablo that I notice are not in this report, to add something like that.
It's very easy to add sites. It's harder to take them away. Yeah.
Any other question?
Okay, I'll go for it. The ABAG requirements are not legally binding, is that correct?
Well, I guess the question really doesn't get to the regional housing needs numbers, which are legally binding. So that's my understanding, is that the regional housing needs numbers are binding. And I don't know if Barb wants to add on to that.
I mean, the RENA numbers are binding to the extent that you must find enough sites to accommodate the RENA numbers. But in terms of the OBEG plan in general, in terms of the land uses it might show in Albany, although I'm not sure they're very specific, there is not a requirement that the city's plan be consistent with the OBEG plan, but there are a lot of incentives for doing so. I think in terms of some grant funding and so forth, but it's not, that was something that the League of Cities specifically negotiated. It was that there was not a requirement that you be consistent with the OBEG plan. I'd be very surprised, however, if Albany is not consistent. You have quite high densities along that, along the San Pablo corridor and close to transit. So without knowing anything about how the plan relates to Albany, I'd be really amazed if you weren't consistent.
Okay, I have a few questions about the waterfront secondary housing. Jeff, would you like them now? Should I ask them later? I think some of the commenters might raise these same issues. Secondary housing, like that little studio in my backyard, which I might want to rent out to a college student some year. How is that considered in the housing element?
Barry, you want to?
Sure. So secondary units are discussed as an important source of affordable housing. They're not restricted to low or very low income households, at least not yet. Some communities have done that and said that you can create a second unit under certain conditions if it's restricted to a low or very low income household. But for the most part, they're affordable by design. I mean, they're just by their size, by the typical market rents that are charged for them. Most secondary units fall in the low or moderate income band. So we can count secondary units that are newly created as being affordable, the smaller units generally to low, the larger units generally to moderate income households.
And how are they counted in this particular? I mean, I was there at
Right.
P&Z when you were going over the potential spots, mostly along the San Pablo and Solano corridors.
Right.
I didn't hear much discussion about, in-law apartments.
What we've said in this element is that based on production for the last 10 years, that we can realistically expect that we can get 4 more second units produced in the remainder of the planning period. We haven't counted, 40 units. I think in the 2009 draft, when there were still 5 years left in the period, the presumption was that there would be 40 new second units, or the potential for 40 new second units. The reality is it's more like 1 or 2 a year, and so realistically, 4 units is about. I think that's a more realistic estimate for the remainder of the period.
And just briefly, because I think there'll be some comments on this, tell us about the waterfront and how the potential for housing on the waterfront anywhere was incorporated into the housing element.
Well, for some context, just as a reminder to the council, for the zoning districts, in the waterfront zoning district, right now, residential is not a permitted use. And pursuant to Measure C, which was approved by the voters back in the day, any change in that land use designation would require a vote of the citizens to approve that rezoning. So that involves some time to bring that to the voters, which isn't. We don't have enough time in this current housing element to be able to do that. As we look at the general plan, update the general plan for the 2035 time period, if the council wanted to explore that kind of policy, it would be the next housing element where that might be appropriate to consider.
Thanks, that's all.
All right, I'm going to open this to the public. You're going to have 1 minute per person, so we can get as many people who would like to speak. We would like you to turn in your cards. She will read all the names, and we'll ask you to sign up or stand over here so that we can facilitate everyone's getting to speak. So if you would like to speak, please fill out a card and turn it in. Okay, to the clerk, please. And then just stay put, you may as well start. Young lady, you may as well start.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Collins. I'm an attorney with the Public Interest Law Project. I represent affordable housing advocates, Albany Housing Advocates, and 2 individuals in an action that we filed against the city involving the housing element for this planning period. We've submitted several comments to the Planning and Zoning Commission and another letter to the City Council this evening. I'm just going to very briefly summarize that at this particular point, we have asked that the council not authorize staff to make revisions to the draft housing element that you have in front of you before sending it to HCD, unless that comes back to the public for public input and another public hearing so that we can identify what revisions the staff is wanting to include. We'd also like to see that the draft is revised to address the many comments from the planning commissioners and from the public that they have received in this very rushed process. In particular, we'd like to see this draft revised to change the policies and programs, Chapter 6. And that's because Chapter 6 was drafted prematurely. We believe that the cart was put before the horse, since the constraints analysis and the site inventory were not even done when that was addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Hansen. I'm an attorney with the Public Interest Law Project, and I also represent Albany Housing Advocates. I'm going to talk specifically about the boomerang fund suggestion that was made from the Planning and Zoning Commission that was recommended before the council to approve tonight. So before the dissolution of redevelopment agencies in California, 20% of tax increment was set aside specifically for the use of affordable housing. After dissolution, those funds that were deposited that were unencumbered got swept to the state. And in Albany, this was about $700,000. And one of the things that local jurisdictions have done, they've chosen to adopt a strategy to reallocate some of these funds that have come back to the city and use those funds toward affordable housing. The one thing that I would suggest is that the Planning and Zoning Commission wanted to place priority on allocating these funds to transitional and inclusionary housing, and we'd like to see those allocated to just extremely low income populations. Thanks.
Thank you.
Could I have Amber Whitson and David Livia and Francesco Papalia? Carrie, go ahead.
I'm Carol O'Keefe. I'm an Albany resident. I wanted to begin by thanking staff and particularly planning commissioners for the many meetings and many hours that they have spent working on this project. I want to endorse a mention that is in the draft before you, toward the end, listing all of the comments that have been provided. And at the very final part of that, there's sort of the repeated comments, and one of them talks about mentioning that the current zoning and land use requirements that we have as a result of Measure C for the waterfront constitute a constraint. I think it's worth noting that twice in the last 8 years, there's been proposed development on the waterfront, and the developers would have been receptive to discussing housing in both cases. That says to me that makes it a reasonably likely area to be included. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Amber Whitson, CFO, Albany Housing Advocates. And I represent Amber Whitson, who is one of the named plaintiffs on the housing element lawsuit, because you guys are just so wrong. Not all of you, and not you personally, but you being the city of Albany's government for years has been pretending like they didn't have homeless people while they cast us off to the dump, and didn't set anything up for us for when they wanted us out of their dump. So I'd just like for you to take this one single minute that you have clearly begrudgingly granted to the public for us to comment on this housing element that the City of Albany has been negligent in having in an acceptable state for the California Department of Housing and Community Development for years. And think about the fact that you need to make sure you don't just zone part of your town for shelter, but that you zone part of your town and at least a site in your town appropriate to the actual need, which is 60-something. We're not sure, 65, I think, now. But yeah, zone for the amount, not for it, just it.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Levin, attorney with Bay Area Legal Aid, also part of the housing element lawsuit. And we certainly appreciate the effort that's unfortunately belatedly going into this housing element. But just how serious the pressure is on the city is apparent if you go to the HCD website, like I did this morning, and look at the compliance report for housing element. You can see that Albany, unfortunately, is in the bottom 3% of jurisdictions in California in terms of having an overdue formal submission to HCD, and Albany's the only one of over 100 jurisdictions in the Bay Area that hasn't made such a submission to HCD. And it's our clients that really need this process and need the housing that would come out of this plan. And you can see that in table 4.1 on page 4-2 in your draft housing element. Very important chart that's worth studying, and shows that no units have been built or approved, for example, in the very low income where our clients fall. And so there really is more public participation needed to make this process worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, can I get the graphic that was how the 3 different periods?
And wait until he gets it before he starts.
My name is Francesco Papalia. Mr. Miller, can you kind of address or give us some kind of information from your perspective and seeing this kind of process happen in so many cities as to how well we've been doing in the past or what we didn't do and what kind I mean, these are a little confusing for me as to, and maybe to the public, as to what got done, what should have been done, or how we could have, from your analysis and seeing things, what were the main weaknesses in our public policy that limited our ability to produce the proper housing that was needed and that we were trying to have, because so that we can correct it, because something was not working. And what do you think are like the top 3 reasons we didn't achieve our goals?
Thank you. Next. Ann.
Good evening. My name is Ann Miley, and I just have one single question. Since many of us will be here participating in participatory democracy as we go through this process of the housing element, the bulb clearance, et cetera, I'd like to know the authority for limiting people to 1 minute to speak, whether it's an ordinance, a rule of practice, or something citable. I would appreciate that.
We are limiting people to 1 minute on the basis of this being a very long meeting and the fact that we want to hear from everybody. And we expected a very large number of people, so we did this in advance to be sure that we could hear people. We also have obviously had many public hearings prior to this. So we assume that at this point, people can summarize their comments so that we can hear them. We certainly have them in print, as was noted earlier. So that's the reason. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? Okay. Then would you please answer some of the questions which have been raised?
Jeff's going to respond to Francesco's question, I think, and I may
that's
add,
what the one I'm.
I'll add on to that if his 3 reasons are different than my 3 reasons.
Okay.
Well, actually, I think I'll let Barry give the 3 reasons, but I'd like to give a little bit of data for you as a point of comparison. I went back to look at the 1999 to 2006 planning period, the column on the left there, and look at how other cities in the Bay Area have done. There are a total of 100 cities plus 9 counties, unincorporated county areas, so 109 jurisdictions. 10% of the jurisdictions achieved 100% of their very low income. Overall, the average in the Bay Area was 44%. So while we have 64 units there, the average city reached 44% of their requirement. For the low income, the 29 of the 109 jurisdictions reached their target, and the average was, in that case, 75%. So while we certainly should strive to achieve 100% of our allocation, it's not. It's the reality is that jurisdictions on average don't quite get there. We're a little bit more challenged in Albany because of a built-out city, and perhaps Barry will be getting to that as well. But I just wanted to point out the little bit of the factual context. Again, that was for the period 1999 through 2006. I'm sorry I don't have more recent data for the current, since 2006.
What I would add to that is your RHNA number is actually fairly high given the size of the city and the population of the city. What surprises me is that the number is as high as it is because the number of sites the number of available sites for development is so small. There are a small number of sites. The sites you have are themselves small and they're expensive, and most of them have something going on there already. So this is not Brentwood or Antioch or a city on the edge of the region that has lots of room to grow. You're compact, boxed in, very dense already. So the first reason is just the limited availability of sites. Second is the economy. It's been a terrible time for housing. It's not right now, but for most of this 2007 to 2014 period, there was not a lot of housing being built anywhere. Albany was certainly not alone. And the third reason I would say is that the city has fairly tight or fairly tough parking standards. And that could be a disincentive. I think we write about that in the housing element, that Albany's parking standards for studios and 1-bedrooms are higher than any place else around here. So that's a disincentive that is constraining the number of multifamily units, certainly, I think. Those would be my top 3.
I'm probably a little bit outside my role as attorney, but I would just say that in terms of actually constructing the affordable housing, there has been not been nearly enough money. And I think that the factors that Barry has cited make the city less attractive to affordable housing developers, primarily the small sites that can accommodate relatively small projects. Affordable housing developers, whom my firm represents many of, like to build somewhat larger projects that are more economical to run.
Question. I've always wondered about not only our built-out status and that we have the very large condominiums on Pierce Street that seem to jump up our numbers in a way that we might not have had if those places had not been built. And is there any way to change numbers for those amount of people that are already here in such a small area that could lower what we would be required to do? It just seems like we are kind of, like you said, dinged for having a certain number right now, but then not having the sites on the other side. It doesn't seem quite fair.
Yeah. There isn't really an opportunity to adjust the numbers based on what's here now. I mean, and really what is intended to drive the numbers is job growth, which is another reason why it's a little puzzling why the numbers are as they are, because there's not a lot of job growth projected for the city.
The process, if I may kind of add to that, the process that ABAG sets up is intentionally bulletproof, if you will. And they use a formula that is developed over a series of years, and it is not fine-tuned for any particular community, certainly not for Albany. And furthermore, if we were to say we think the number is too high, we'd in effect have to find another jurisdiction that'd be willing to accept the increase so that the bottom line for the region remains the same. So it's a tough process. I don't think very many communities have been successful in changing their number.
Also, the courts have decided that the numbers are not reviewable by the courts. Not justiciable is the legal term for it.
I've got a little historical question that goes back to the fact that in 1995, I moved to University Village as a graduate student in the old Section B, and I had just incredibly dirt cheap rent. For a while there, it was about $500 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. And then when they rebuilt the village, the rates went up essentially to market rate. They were much nicer looking too. So how did that affect the housing allocations by income levels, or did it?
It didn't really affect the allocations. It does affect the city's reporting of its progress over the last 10 years. So during that 99 to 2006 period, the housing that was demolished and then rebuilt at University Village was counted by the city as evidence that the city was producing housing. It falls in the moderate income range, just based on the market rents for those units. They're moderate income units. For the 2007 to 2014 period, you had the tail end of the UC Village reconstruction, the first 3 years of that period. So there are some units that were counted in that period as well towards the moderate number. But the units in UC Village didn't really address low or very low income needs. The units that have been built are all, based on their current rents, they're all market rate, moderate income.
My question is, in 1995, were we helped because we had so many very low cost rental units in the village?
What I would say about that is that your numbers, if you look at the bar chart, your numbers are actually highest in the above moderate and moderate, above moderate bands. Communities that have larger numbers of above moderate income housing, high income communities with a lot of expensive homes, typically have their largest numbers on these bar charts in the low and very low columns. So in some ways, the housing at UC Village benefited you by skewing the numbers to say you have a large number of lower income households already. They're student households at UC Village. What you don't have is a lot of above moderate income units. I mean, it's a little bit off from what goes on in most communities. For example, if you look at the bar chart for Piedmont, the numbers are all down in the low and very low. They're 2/3 of their allocation is low and very low because they already have a lot of above moderate income.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments?
I've got comments. But,
Please.
Oh, okay. Plenty of comments. I too would like to thank the Planning and Zoning Commission for the extra effort they did to kind of bring this before us. I know they had to add a session in order to get the Chapter 5 reviewed, and they put in a lot of long hours, as they always do. And this is kind of rushed on some level, but it's also at the tail end of this period, and we need to get it done. And as soon as this is done, we're going to be banging right into our next housing element. So a lot of the comments that don't make it into this one are going to be discussed in full, I'm sure, over the next year for our 2015-2022 element. I'm very grateful that we have a general plan consultant working on this who's had experience preparing these and getting them before HCD and working us through the process. You know, it's regrettable this didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago, but it's true. The economy went south, and staff and time and energy was not there to complete this. I would say affordable housing development or housing development in general is a problem for the whole Bay Area. And it's been, I think, in my opinion, a problem since about 1980. Not just a recent thing, but we are a big attractant for the rest of the country and for people coming from all over. We have a lot of space set aside for open space and protection that we're not going to build onto, so the amount of places we can put any kind of housing are diminishing. If you ask builders what keeps them from building housing, they'll come up with things that we don't even have on our list. Well, the diminishing amount of space, CEQA is something that a lot of builders can't stand, or more precisely, CEQA abuse. And those who have paid attention to the development at UC Village may know something about that. The down economy over the last 4 years certainly stopped it in this town and in a lot of places. My recollection when I was on planning and zoning, we approved a lot of developments, some of them on San Pablo, some of them just off of Solano, one of them over on right next to the El Cerrito Shopping Center. I can't remember which street that was, but there were large developments and the housing would have gone forward. They were approved, they were ready to go, and nothing ever happened. And it had a lot to do with the economy just flattening out. And government regulation in general. And unfortunately, things like inclusionary housing requirements sometimes stops housing being built if developers can't figure out how to put in the inclusionary housing and also make a profit. We have our number of regulatory constraints in this town. I think a lot of them are looked at and addressed, but numero uno is our Measure D. It is essentially, and to my opinion, is our housing policy right now. Measure D was put into effort to stop housing. It's done a splendid job of doing it, and it needs, you know, I'm a little radical on this, I must say. It needs to do more than just go away. I mean, be revised. It needs to go away. There are many other ways we can adjust parking and issues around parking and parking management. Parking requirements, I think, is a crazy way to do it. You know, there was a number of ideas that I think can be incorporated from the Planning and Zoning Commission hearings that I looked at into this housing element. I like the idea of looking at our boomerang funds that have come out of the end of redevelopment. I think that it's going to be necessary to do more than just take away you know, the restriction type of things on our building codes. We need to actually incentivize low-cost housing, which may require some kind of funding that the city starts putting together. I think we need tonight to pass this on, get it before HUD with as many of the suggestions that we've had up to this point, and then deal with what the state may like or what changes they'll bring down, and then start working on our next element, which I think a lot of the really great ideas that have come out of all these hearings, I think we can really start incorporating. My last comment on this is a lot of what goes on in this town seems to me a fear of increased density, that if we do add housing along our corridors of Solano, San Pablo, we are going to have more people in town, and I think there's kind of a fear of that. But I personally believe that's what'll save this city, is that if we add housing in the places where we already have our commercial areas, it's going to really revitalize commercial areas. And it's going to make all these little shops that are slowly but surely becoming nail salons or hair cutting places, it gives them a chance to come back and provide goods and services to everybody in town, because they'll have a base that's right there. It also says, it does a lot for our greenhouse gas emission goals and other things. But it's a concept that I think a lot of people fear, but I don't know, to my mind, it's the way Albany needs to be going. That's my speech.
I'd like to move that we authorize staff to make final edits and submit the draft of the housing element and submit the draft to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for review.
Do you want to explore the boomerang or not?
Yes, and to explore the boomerang element.
I'll second that.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Wiles, seconded by Councilmember Moss, that we authorize staff to make final revisions to the draft housing element, authorize submittal of the draft to the State Housing and Community Development Department for review, and explore the use of former redevelopment boomerang funds for implementation for inclusionary and transitional housing policies and programs. Is there anyone who'd like to speak?
I'd like to make a comment. I mean, I know that we want to vote, but did everybody get a chance to say, Michael, did you get a chance to say anything else? Well, I mean, I feel like we didn't get a chance to really be asked if we had something else to say before you should move that. So.
No, you can speak now.
Okay.
This is the time for discussion after a motion.
Okay. Well, I like a lot of the things that Pete, Councilmember Moss has said, and I do agree with. We have to look at the corridors. I also think that there's a corridor that goes up next to El Cerrito Plaza, where I think El Cerrito is going to be building some big housing that did not get built a few years ago. It's going to come back. So the idea of having things as close as possible to BART is really important. And there are a lot of blocks that were not included this time on San Pablo that I think need to be looked at. Maybe not just specific sites, but even how you make sure that there's an area that somebody can be incentivized to perhaps take over some spots to have a big enough housing element. So I guess that's it for right now.
Yeah, I see on page 624, 6-24, it says at the top, Program 4.G, Measure D ballot initiative. So I would just like to recommend that we really do move ahead with getting that ballot initiative going. I think it's probably our next general election is in about a year. I'm not sure how much P&Z or folks have thought about that, but I strongly concur with what Pete said. And so I guess my question is, let's say hypothetically, in a best of all possible worlds, we fixed Measure D or stomped it into little pieces in a year from now. How would that work and coordinate with our approval process for the general plan?
Well, I mean, it just depends which one goes first. We could, if that were to go to the voters in November, we probably won't have the general plan approved by next November. We'd be very close, I think, hopefully, but that's a pretty aggressive schedule to have it completed by then. So then the general plan would kind of reflect the voters' action on Measure D. The alternative is, if you weren't to put it on the ballot in 2014, you could have a policy in the general plan that says, put it on the ballot by such and such a date. So those are kind of the main strategic issues or strategic choices that you have for the general plan. If you were to put it on the ballot right away, it certainly would help in eliminating a housing constraint and implementing some of these housing policy recommendations and help facilitate housing development. It would allow development to occur at a higher density without making the buildings bigger. Basically, right now, our buildings, as they come through the approval process, because there's so much parking in them, they have to be larger. And so we could be a little bit more efficient in the design and construction of the buildings.
The question then is, if it's not in 2014, when is the next chance to change D? You can't use the policy to change D as the policy to do it, can you? You see what I'm saying with you have to vote on it first. So you'd have to wait another 2 years for an election, right? Okay, well, that seems like a long time away.
That's the key policy decision for the council. Yeah, absolutely.
So some of our major problems with inclusionary housing basically has to do with voter initiatives versus, or maybe both, developers feeling that they can't do this financially. Is it a combination, do you think? I know we've had a few units built, but not many. And
yeah, it's a combination. Ideally, the affordable housing developer wants a large enough site so they can use their management staff efficiently. And if you're going to have a management person, it's better to have that person covering 20, 30, 40 units rather than 5 or 6. It just makes efficient use of. But then there's also the construction cost. And there are various numbers that float around of the cost of building a parking space, but it adds something in the neighborhood, depending on how you look at it, between $20,000 and $50,000 to the cost of construction of a apartment unit. So that makes it all the more challenging to make the unit affordable to the ultimate renter. And we can fine-tune the parking standards. I'm sensitive to the parking impacts on neighborhoods, so we can fine-tune parking standards so that they're set so that a larger apartment might have the 2 spaces if necessary, but the smaller apartments, like a studio apartment or 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, they don't necessarily need 2 parking spaces. The data is pretty clear. So I would suggest if and when we get there, we fine-tune the parking requirements both to make it affordable for the developer and also to address the neighborhood impacts.
any further discussion or questions, comments?
Could I just ask for a point of clarification? Is the council intending that the exploration of the boomerang funds would be added as a program to the housing element? Or just that would happen separately from the housing element?
My suggestion would be that we add it as a program to the housing element if that's acceptable to the council. We would essentially insert a new program that would recommend pursuing that with a description of the action.
So we're good for that. We're both good for that.
And I think that's the way the motion reads, yeah. Okay, would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. And we will adjourn until 7:30. It's okay. Hey, hi. Hi, Bart.
In the back.
Get my dinner off my shirt before I go out and do that. I had sprouts. Oh dear. Come on, too.
Where we go?
After you fill out the speaker card, please turn them in to me, please.
The regular meeting of the Albany City Council for October 21st will please come to order. Roll call.
Councilmember Atkinson,
Present.
Councilmember Barnes,
Present.
Councilmember Moss,
Here.
Vice Mayor Weil,
Here.
Mayor Thompson.
Here. Next item. Report of,
Report on action taken in closed session, if any.
all right, the council received information from council and took no action. Next item.
Consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar.
Is there any item a member of the council would like to have removed from the consent calendar? Is there any item a member of the public would like to have removed? 4-5. Would you please come to the podium and speak to it?
Yes, I'm Bob Otis. I certainly agree that reform of Prop 13 is desperately needed, but it is a mistake to think of it as simply an issue of the corporate holdings of land. One of the most invidious parts of Proposition 13 is what's called the parent-child exclusion, which enables children to maintain their parents' assessment in properties not only for the single-family home, but up to $1 million of assessed valuation. I see that as a lawyer. I see it as a renter. I can tell you there are situations where parents have passed property to their children that has an assessed valuation that's probably 20% of the fair market value. That is a very serious aspect of Prop 13 that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to pull an item and speak to it? Seeing no one, we'll bring this back to council.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Yeah, I can second that. Should we talk to 4-5 or as a separate one?
Well, you certainly.
Yeah, I'm the one that put that on. I agree that there are several aspects of Prop 13, well, a number of them, that have really warped any number of things, including housing, if you really look at it, and what it's done for housing turnover and things like that. I think the current actions to look at least initially, commercial part of it is perhaps only the beginning of what we have to do to Proposition 13. And that's why I would support the current efforts to change it.
And do you want to second them?
I will second.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil, seconded by Councilmember Moss, that we approve the consent calendar. Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson,
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes,
Aye.
Councilmember Moss,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil,
Yes.
Mayor Thompson.
Aye, the motion carries. Next item, please.
Presentation, proclamations in recognition of the Albany Chamber of Commerce 2013 Citizen of the Year, Carol O'Keefe, and Youth of the Year, Talia Tom.
Carol, would you please join me at the podium? Some people in town do a little, some people do a lot. And the two people whom we're honoring tonight have done a lot, and we thank you both. So we have a proclamation for each. Why don't you move out a little bit? There you go. In recognition of the Chamber of Commerce 2013 Citizen of the Year, Carol O'Keefe. Whereas the Albany Chamber of Commerce annually honors Albany citizens and students who, for their volunteer work that makes Albany such a special place to live and work. And whereas the 2013 Albany Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year has been awarded to Carol O'Keefe. And whereas Carol serves as part of the Albany YMCA, Albany Community Foundation, Albany Chamber of Commerce, Albany Rotary Club, and the Friends of Albany Library. And whereas Carol currently serves as chair of the city's Charter Review Committee, and whereas Carol has also served on the city's Sustainability Committee and the Measure E Bond Oversight Committee for the Albany Unified School District, and whereas Carol is an avid volunteer, providing ongoing support to numerous community functions every year. And whereas Carol can be found at most city public meetings, taking the time to contribute ideas and information to help with city projects and programs. And whereas community members such as Carol help to add to the unique character of Albany's urban village by the bay, where involvement and volunteerism make our community rich. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Albany City Council hereby honors Carol O'Keefe as the 2013 Albany Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year, and thanks Carol for her ongoing dedication to the city. Carol works tirelessly for the community, and she's just a super volunteer. Thank you so much. No speaking. Okay. All right, thank you. And in addition to having an adult volunteer of the year, we have a student volunteer of the year. And we have a young lady, again, as I said, who is just an outstanding example of our youth. In recognition of the Chamber of Commerce 2013 Citizen of the Year, Thalia Tom. Whereas the Albany Chamber of Commerce annually honors Albany citizens and students for their volunteer work that makes Albany such a special place to live and work. And whereas the 2013 Albany Chamber of Commerce Youth of the Year honor has been awarded to Thalia Tom. And whereas Thalia is a senior and an honors student at Albany High. Whereas Thalia tirelessly helps plan, organize, prep, clean, and do all the necessary tasks to make school events successful. So she's going to fall into Carol's steps after she gets out. And whereas Thalia is the voice of the Daily Bulletin at Albany High School, and whereas Thalia was recently elected Associate Student Body President for this school year, and whereas Thalia also finds time to serve as a student representative to the School Instructional Improvement Committee, write for the student newspaper, The Cougar, and hold records on the cross-country team. So she's has many, many interests. Whereas youth as dedicated as Thalia remind us all of the promise of tomorrow's leaders, now therefore be it proclaimed that the Albany City Council hereby honors Thalia Tom as the 2013 Albany Chamber of Commerce Youth of the Year and thanks her for her ongoing dedication to the city. Thank you.
Ellen Graves.
I'm Ellen Graves, and I have the honor of being the president of the Albany Chamber of Commerce. And we had the privilege of celebrating these two people last week. And I would like to thank the City Council for also honoring them. I think they're wonderful examples of what makes this great city really great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next item, please.
Good of the City Public Forum announcements. For a person desiring to address the City Council on an item that's not on the agenda, please note that city policy limits each speaker to 1 minute. The Brown Act limits the City Council's ability to take in or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda.
Okay, to reiterate, this is a time for people to speak to items not on the agenda. You will have 1 minute. Please fill out a card so that we can move as many people who want to speak. And I think that's it. So if you would like to speak, please come to the podium. Is there anyone who wants to speak under good of the city?
So I'm pretty sure this part of the meeting is for covering stuff that's not on the actual official agenda and doesn't count stuff that's on the closed session agenda, I'm guessing. So I was just wondering, I'm sure you guys won't answer my question because you guys don't tend to answer questions during this part, but if you could, I'd appreciate it. Where exactly in the parts of town that you are going to be freshly zoning for accommodating emergency shelter, do you think that you're going to be able to find a site that you can actually slate to have a capacity for 65 beds? Because I know that, it would make sense for you to zone a large enough property in your town to hold your capacity. It wouldn't make very much sense for you to zone it to hold the capacity of homeless people you have and then not actually have a shelter, especially if the city is the one providing it for your actual capacity of at least 65 people and counting. Got any clues, questions?
This is the time for people to speak. The council does not respond.
Anybody else want to answer? Cleveland or East Shore Highway?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Paul O'Curry, and I go to the senior center a lot, and right next door to the senior center is where the childcare is, and now the house next to the senior center is also being used by teens, which means there's a lot of activity, people crossing the road or whatever. And we have a crosswalk of sorts, but the traffic really speeds along there. And I would like somebody on the city council maybe to address to traffic and safety a way to either slow down the traffic or at least put up one of those little men that stand in the middle of the sidewalk that says stop for pedestrians who are in the crosswalk. Because there are so many people and so many times of the day that people have to park on both sides and they have to get across the street. And it would really encourage people to be act in a more safe way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lisa Kleinbub, Albany City resident. I have a question regarding this time limit. When I read tonight's agenda under item 6, Good of the City Public Forum announcements, the agenda actually states that City Council policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. So I'm quite perplexed by this change in time limits that has seemed quite arbitrary to me in the last couple of months, and I do think it's important that we take the time to listen to comments and to give everyone time to hear and to understand.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak under good of the city? Anybody on council? I have an item which is a sad item, actually. We've lost Mary Librarian. Many of you, especially those of you who grew up in Albany, know that Mary Wallman was was a librarian at Albany High School for many years. She was dedicated to helping students. In addition, she accompanied all of the musical programs that students had year in and year out. She was a pianist and self-taught organist at her church, and eventually she became a school board member. She was a native of Albany, and we will adjourn this meeting in her memory. Next item, please.
Public hearing, appeal of planning application 13-44, 726 Cerrito Street, design review and conditional use permit for a new single-family home. Staff recommendation that the City Council approve resolution number 2013-61, upholding the Planning and Zoning Commission decision to approve design review and a conditional use permit for a new single-family home at 726 Cerrito Street, and adopt finding affirming with any modifications the approval of application 13-44 by Linville Pond Architect for Barry Kwong and Noel Diaz.
Council members, my name is Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. We have a revised recommendation for you this evening. Both the applicant and the appellant have agreed to a continuance of tonight's public hearing so that some issues with respect to the accuracy of information submitted to the city can be sorted out. Therefore, our recommendation is to continue to a date uncertain. We will renotice the postcards and everything else once we get the facts sorted out and bring that public hearing back to you in the next meeting or two.
Thank you. The chair will entertain a motion regarding the recommendation to continue to a date uncertain the appeal of the parcel 13-0447 at 726 Cerrito Street.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Councilmember Barnes, seconded by Councilmember Moss, that we continue the appeal hearing to a date uncertain. Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. Next item, please.
Proposed Albany Waterfront Park Transition Plan, language in 8-4, no camping ordinance, planning and zoning code for homeless shelter. Staff recommendation that Council 1 approve Resolution 2013-60, allocating up to $531,000 for the Albany Waterfront Transitional Plan, to authorize the city manager or his or her designee to enter into a contract with Tucker Construction for the cleanup of Albany bulb for up to $100,000. 3, authorize the city manager or his designee to enter into a contract with Operation Dignity for up to $154,000 for management of transitional housing for 6 months. 3A, as an alternative to providing a mobile transition center operated by Operation Dignity, consider whether to authorize staff to prepare a homeless transition plan based on the written proposal by the attorneys for Albany Housing Advocates dated October 15, 2013. 4, direct staff to bring forward a technical clarifying amendment to the no camping ordinance to delete the word loiter from the ordinance. 5, approve resolution of intention to amend the planning and zoning code for homeless shelter.
Okay, staff, please.
Madam Mayor and Council, because we have a number of items that are recommended to you this evening, what staff is recommending is that we answer all of your questions for items 1 through 3A first. And then once we have, and then all of the 1 through 3A are for the ACT plan and also for the alternative that has been suggested by the Albany Housing Advocates. After we've answered your questions for 1 through 3A, then we would answer all of your questions dealing with the ordinance language and the word loitering. We have legal counsel here to answer any of your questions for that. And then lastly, after we've answered your questions for that item, we move on to the last item about the resolution for the emergency homeless shelter, and we have Community Development Director Jeff Bond here to answer your questions about that. So to summarize the staff report, before you is a plan that staff has drafted for your consideration for a mobile transitional housing units down at the Bulb. This would be in conjunction with continued case management with BFHP. You have already approved their contract through December. They would concentrate on case management and continued housing efforts. And that would also mean contracting with Operation Dignity to offer management of the shelter. And all of those items are listed in a budget for your consideration, and also the types of programs that we would continue to offer in the mobile transition unit. In terms of the number 4, which is to direct staff, I need to put my glasses on here, to forward a technical clarifying amendment to the no camping ordinance to delete the word loiter from the ordinance. As for that, concern has been expressed by the representatives of the homeless advocacy groups about possible vagueness of some of the terms used in the city's no camping ordinance, particularly the term loiter used by the Albany Municipal Code. Therefore, staff is recommending that council direct staff to bring forward technical clarification amendment to the no camping ordinance and to delete the word loiter from the ordinance. And then lastly, we have the component of the resolution for the intention to amend the planning and zoning code for the homeless shelter. So given that summary of the items that we're asking you to consider tonight, we're happy to start with any questions you have for items 1 through 3A.
Does any council member have a question regarding items 1 through 3A?
I would just like to point out that item 1 should probably read $570,000, which will give us room to approve the extra costs of the showers and the subsidized housing.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, maybe you could go into a little detail about what's driving the cost for the cleanup. 100,000, nice round number to clean things up. Also, that $25,000 management fee. I think would be useful for me and probably for other people here to hear about what those details are.
The $25,000 project management fee for Gail Rossi, he has already started in helping us put together some of the quotes and also negotiating some of the contracts for your consideration. He's also been working on what it would require to prepare the site for placement of the trailers, and including generators, hookup, cost of gas for the generators. So he's put together cost estimates and negotiated some of the contracts for what we're proposing to do down there with the trailers. He's also coordinating the public works staff to do a camp by camp, a cleanup of the abandoned camps so that we can get a head start on anything we can do with cleanup at the Bulb. He has also visited the city of San Jose twice. They've already gone through 17 encampment cleanups this year and have developed some policies and procedures for doing that. He went just last week and visited and watched them do an encampment cleanup in an effort to learn how and what they do so that he could bring that knowledge back to public works staff and oversee them as they clean up. A lot of it has to do with the proper storage of personal property, what can be thrown away, what should not be thrown away, what should be stored, and how to log and document and catalog those for property owners to retrieve them. There are very certain and specific ways to do that. So he's already started his job in terms of project management, and it's not just project management for cleanup. In terms of the cleanup with Tucker Construction, also in your packet is a breakdown of the cost for what they've are proposing to do. And through the different types and the different contracts and the different people that we've talked with, Tucker Construction is the most well-versed in what they do, and they're also certified to handle the biohazard and hazardous material cleanup and disposal. And that's really a large part of the cost.
Okay, thank you.
I think that this was a good question, and actually $570,000 is a very large amount of money for a small town. It's a huge piece of our budget. So I would appreciate your taking some of the other elements and telling what kind of research you've done to come to the place where we are at this point for those elements.
Actually, staff has been putting together and discussing, we meet weekly as department heads to discuss various aspects of how we might clean up the bulb and manage the bulb and assist the homeless in finding housing. And through that effort, we've talked to a number of organizations. Isabel LeDuc has been working for about 18 months to 2 years trying to unravel what services the city has already at our disposal and trying to take advantage of those. We haven't always been at the table to take advantage of some of those as we should have been in the past, and she can speak to that in greater detail if you'd like. We've also gotten a number of different quotes from just in terms of this endeavor for the modular buildings, trying to keep the cost down. You'll see on the project sheet here, I've listed some of the areas that we've gotten more than one quote in terms of looking at what other cities do to make sure we have the proper categorizing and proper storage of personal property. We've gone to great lengths to make sure that we have admin policies and procedures in place. It's gone through a few drafts as we've met each week with assistance from our legal counsel. We've also put together the policies and procedures for the management of the shelter and the times of day and the different things that would be offered. We sent out and we asked for a proposal from BFHP as well for management of the shelter, and their proposal came back a little higher than Operation Dignity. And so we've done some investigation in terms of we've also talked to property owners along San Pablo to see if there was another place that they would be willing to help us out with a temporary shelter. And for the most part, the property owners haven't been willing to take on. A lot of times it has to do with the fact that it's a short-term lease. Some of them don't have the amenities, and by the time you retrofit the place that would have the bathroom and the showers and the space needed, that it's just not a feasible proposition for them. And we also wanted a place, and using the bulb, we can also have a place for dog kennels. We've also talked to other places that would help us out with boarding with the animals if that was necessary. We are also aware that of the 25 dogs that are at the bulb, most of them, I think all but 3, maybe even 2 now, have been spay or neutered. There's about 5 cats and a few kittens, so we've been trying to get an assessment of what is needed down there and to provide those services at the transition center.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Just very impressive, all the research that you've done and all the time. And I know Isabel's been contacting agencies in Berkeley and really putting in time that we've never been able to do before as a city. So thank you both.
I just want to clarify that the 570 also includes the number 2 is the 100,000, and number 3, the 154,000. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'd like to point out that sooner or later, regardless of exactly how we enact this plan, the cleanup cost, the biohazard remediation is something we would have had to pay for sooner or later anyway.
That's correct.
So then, in a sense, that inflates the budget. On the other hand, it's deflated because we're not, sorry, speaking as an economist, we're not calculating in the opportunity cost of the staff time for the work they're going to do there, which I believe is $76 an hour. We've tried to shift some of the biohazard remediation costs to our own staff, which means they're not doing other things they could be doing.
That's correct.
So we'll have some estimate of that at some point in the future.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, we will open it to the public. Again, you have 1 minute. Please turn in a card. I'd like you to read all of the names so that people can line up, because it looks like we have a very large number of people who would like to speak, and we would like to hear from everybody.
Okay. Ruth Barrett, Beverly Dorr, Kate Cody, Tony Suslak, Alan Eckert, Julie Winkelstein, Jay Atkinson, Brian Jones, Lisa Kleinbub, Shirley Dean, Paul Curry, Amber Whitson, and Ellen Barth.
Okay, so would you please begin?
I'd like to speak to your decision as to whether to choose trailers or a housing subsidy, because some people are disheartened because they're really afraid that you'll pick a plan that will look okay on paper but won't help anybody, that will pull us into a longer legal and political battle, because trailers won't actually transition people into permanent housing, where taking the time to use the same funds for a housing subsidy might. Some people are really disheartened because they're afraid you'll do that. I actually believe in you guys. I believe that you care about the whole community, and I believe that you're interested in providing real help. I think people become a city council member in this town because they think they can make a difference. It's not about wealth or fame, obviously. I've been inspired about how much people care about each other and about housing and human rights in this town. And please give people a real chance.
Thank you. Next, please.
My name is Beverly Dove, and I want to say that the Bulb is a beautiful place to live and thrive. People have enjoyed the space. It gives people a sense of creativity. There is a great deal of creativity that has been done at the Bulb. Creativity does not happen in a structured space as a museum. That is a capitalistic structure. Creativity comes from the spirit. It's a beautiful place. Animals come there, and people have been there for a while. People know how to self-organize, to come together. There was a big study done, and it was noticed that if you left people to get together, they could self-organize. It happened before there were structured governments, uniforms, and authorities. I believe the Bulb is a space that is a beautiful thing for people to enjoy and live in.
Thank you.
Evening, Madam Mayor, City Council members, Tony Sustak, Citizens for East Shore Parks. I want to thank the city for the effort that it's put out. One of my earlier political mentors, back when I was involved in community organizing and stuff, which had to do with some homeless issues then, which was something to really get burned out about. I'm really proud of the city to the extent that the amount of work that's put in here. He pointed out that before you can get better, you got to get sicker. And the city was facing a crisis at the Bulb, and is moving now, thank you. And the people at the Bulb, they need a push. They've gotten comfortable. One of my employers used to say, get used to anything, even dying, if you got enough chances. So this is a very positive step, and I thank you very much, and I do look forward to seeing stuff done for the homeless situation. We also have the Saffron Strand project in Richmond for people who are looking for transition to employment and help to do that. So Saffron Strand in Richmond has opened doors. Please take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Hi, it's me again, Catherine Cody. You may have heard that Patrick Leach died at the Bulb early Thursday morning. He was ill a long time. He was seated in his favorite chair with a little dog he loved on his lap and another warming his feet. He had oxygen and was warm and safe. He spent his last hours joking with and teasing his friends. He passed quietly asleep. You made this possible. For a long time, you've allowed our community to space to grow and to thrive. So we had power to run his O2 concentrator, and he had a safe, warm place to live and die. He did not have to die alone, afraid, and among strangers. For this, I offer my thanks. He was home. So thank you for myself and for Patrick. As he said, this is good. This is fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a public meeting of the City Council. I ask you not to do that, because if you do, I will have to take other measures. So please do not clap.
Hello, I just want to, since I have a short amount of time, list some very candid comments by some people at the Bulb to show the stress and the urgency that we really need to show that they need these services provided. This is a strange place for weather during the winter, and has a tendency for beating things to death, including humans. I was having it pretty rough last week. That was the stress, redoing the house, trying to get the roof back on. You know the house, my cloth house. The illusion of privacy and morals. The illusion of privacy and morals. These are candid comments by some of the Bulb people out there. Beverly Hills would be nice, or someplace warm. Someplace warm. Someplace with indoor plumbing. That's the one thing I really miss is a bathroom. Like, people need these services, and we need to work quickly to provide these for them. They may say one thing on Patch or up here at City Council, but when they're actively allowed to comment freely, people really need and say that they want the kind of stuff that we're willing to provide for them.
Thank you.
Hi, Julie Winkelstein, Albany resident. I just want to respond to that by saying that yes, it's true that they do need help, but what they need is long-term help, permanent help, not temporary help, so that they start out in trailers which they may or may not feel comfortable with or which may or may not be good for them, and then they end up back on the streets. So yes, they definitely need help, but I don't think what they're talking about is temporary. I also just wanted to mention that I was on the task force, the homeless task force, and when I was on it, I was very excited because I thought we were going to address homelessness. It took me a long time to figure out that we were actually not addressing homelessness on the task force. We were addressing parklessness. And I'm really sorry that that's the way it worked out, and that you aren't really addressing the issue of homelessness. What you're trying to do is get land back. So I really plead with you, beg you to consider the alternative that takes a little more time, but actually is a wise use of the Albany residents' funds, and they'll make the world better at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, City Council, Brian Johns, Albany Housing Advocates. I want to make it clear to the council that our group does not expect overworked staff and elected officials to solve this problem. We understand it's a huge problem. So our approach has been to encourage what is a growing public dialogue and to bring more and more groups together in order to solve the problem collectively. So what I'm asking you to do is to continue to support that process and to continue to give us the time and the resources, the $1 million that Jeff Bond could use for subsidized housing, for example, 10 units a year, that we need to solve this problem. Because I do believe if everybody works together, we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa Kleinbub, Albany Housing Advocates. Enforcement of the camping ordinance without a long-term plan for low or very low-income housing criminalizes poverty. Our country has a long history of using laws to keep certain people invisible. Jim Crow laws, sundown towns, anti-Okie rules, and wetback policies. I'm not saying this to be provocative. I'm saying this to make you think about the effect of these laws. These laws targeted and kept people away based on their racial, economic, social, immigration, or disability status. Today, cities pass sit-lie ordinances, municipal workers remove encampments and seize the property of unhoused individuals. The public is disturbed by poor people, by people living on the streets. They are reminded of inequality, misfortune, and maybe our bad housing policies. I ask you tonight as council members not to return to our past legacies.
Thank you.
My name is Jay. I'm very troubled and saddened by the sort of framing of this situation. We talk about camping that's in the ordinance. We're talking about building a park when we already have a park. And I want to be clear that what we're talking about is bulldozing a neighborhood. We have a neighborhood of people, citizens of Albany, who are living in a particular place, and we are evicting them from their homes. And what we are doing when we evict them from their homes and giving them temporary places to be and then be let go, I find very hard to stomach. And I'm sure that you find it very hard to stomach too, which is why I think that they need to be given a transitional period, not a temporary period. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Shirley Dean. I do not live in the city of Albany, but I'm here tonight to support the Citizens for East Shore Park position on the Albany bulb. You'll hear more about that later. Since the 1960s, like hundreds of other citizens, I've actively worked for the completion of what we now call McLaughlin East Shore Park, through fighting to reject a proposal to build an airport and a large shopping mall on Berkeley's waterfront, and supporting a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court to establish the right to create open park space along San Francisco Bay. The bulb is a key piece in fulfilling that promise so many have worked on for so long to achieve. Yes, I understand and personally know how hard it is to sit in your chairs, but do not lose either heart or courage. You will be doing the right thing and following your staff's excellent recommendations, which will assist the homeless, provide transitional services, clean up the bulb, and then transfer it into McLaughlin's East Shore State Park. Each of you will leave a legacy for generations to come. Now is the time.
Thank you.
Good evening again. My name is Paulo Curry, and before the council basically co-opted the homeless task force, we had started already. But when we started, the idea was that we were not just concerned about the people on the bulb, but we were concerned about the people around town. Now, if some of the people end up leaving the bulb and add to the people that are around town, then maybe, we'll decide to do something about that. But I would like us to keep in mind that we should be aware still of the number of people who are homeless, who sometimes end up, under the freeway or different other places or under BART. And I think we have to keep that in mind. We can't think that we've solved the problem once we move the people off the bulb.
Thank you.
First off, I would like to hand the council this, which is it's signatures of people who think that what you're doing, if you go with the staff recommendation, is wrong. This is a petition signed by residents of the Albany Bulb that says that we respectfully request that you terminate your contract with Berkeley Food and Housing Project and actually enlist the services of Homeless Action Center, who we know would actually help us get into housing. Furthermore, I filed a Public Records Act request a while ago, and I found out that it was going to cost enough that if for 6 months of enforcement by police, let's say 6 months after you evict us, $900,000 for police patrols. It would total up to $540,000. This is with the prices that they were going to be being paid in 1999. If their pay went up, it'll be more. Totaling up between what you're going to pay the people to run this shelter nobody's going to stay in, which is $230,435 between them and the cleanup, and then the police patrols, you're looking at $1,670,000. Sorry, $1,670,435, but $35,000 on housing people.
Thank you.
Maybe, if you choose that.
Could I have the next following people line up after Ellen? Mark, Naomi, Glenn Backhelder, Patricia Moore, Anka, Marie Castaldi, Lewis, Megan, Edward Bennett, Robert Hasty, Norman LaForce, Brian Parker, and Francesco Papalia.
My name's Ellen Barth. I don't live in Albany. I've lived in Berkeley since 1958. I've walked the shoreline since it was mostly a garbage dump. I very much appreciate all the city staff work and time and all the city council effort to come and make the bulb available to the general public again. I applaud the Waterfront Park transition plan. I have played with children on the beach, which I had to stop going because of the dogs. I walked the perimeter of the bulb once it started being a garbage dump. and I very much appreciate the whole area. I do not feel that those who enjoy the beautiful place out there should have exclusive use of it. I believe that the system which has worked towards having it be a park available to everyone should continue. And as to campers and homeless, I am overwhelmed by the comprehensive plans that you have to support them to new homes. My niece is homeless and lives in a city and state where there is no support. When she will not live in the structured housing and goes out and is found by police, they take her and put her in jail overnight, and then they let her go when she's warmed up enough. I am awed by what you have done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Naomi, and I'm volunteer with Food Not Bombs, and I'm just going to read our letter of support. As an organization that works closely with the homeless and displaced citizens and provides food to them on a daily basis, we stand in solidarity with the residents of the Albany Bulb and strongly disagree with their displacement. The costly development of the area as a recreational space and dog walking park seems to be an absurd waste of money when the Albany Bulb is already appreciated by the East Bay residents for its uniqueness as a wild, undeveloped space for these said activities. In 1999, many Food Not Bombs volunteers who are still active today witnessed the eviction and inappropriately named Operation Dignity intervened. They did this in 1999 eviction, and it was awful. They bring out a trailer, have it open from 5:30 to 9 a.m. There would be 15 bunk beds available for a total of 30 clients per night. They run it like a detention facility, and there are no facilities for people's possessions. There are about 60 people. So we're urging you to not do this, and just that it's wrong, and that there's already a space for us to, for the people to be there. And
you need to finish up.
Okay, I'm finished.
Thank you.
My name is Anka. I'm also with Food Not Bombs. And I encourage you to check one place out that's in the United States of America, Hangtow Haven, in Placerville. That's a homeless camp that the City Council recently extended the camp's operating permit and allowed the homeless people living in there to create a homeless camp and manage it. How it operates, it all limits to local people, so there's no outsiders coming in. And the camp has been successfully operating for quite a while without any problem, without even the police is saying that there is no increase in crime in the place. So it is possible, instead of spending thousands and thousands of dollars on Operation Dignity, which happened in '99, obviously that's not going to work. It didn't work in '99, it's not going to work right now. So why not give it a chance and get homeless off the street and just give them the bulb? So check it out, Placerville.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mari. I am an advocate for homeless and low-income people in Alameda County. I wanted to talk about both of the proposals you're considering tonight. One is to evict all the current residents of the Albany Bulb and place them into trailers in the parking lot of the Bulb. This would be difficult to access for many of the people living at the Bulb with disabilities and would only accommodate about half of the people currently living at the Bulb. This is not an acceptable solution. This was tried in 1999 during the first time people were kicked out of the Bulb, and it didn't work then. What makes us think it's going to work now? The alternate proposal is by far more thoughtful and has a much better chance of investing your resources in a permanent solution. Residents of the Albany Bulb need permanent housing, and I can tell you as a caseworker that takes time and requires resources. If you go with your first proposal, you'll find yourselves in the same position you're in now a few years from now. It's very admirable that you're committed to investing resources and assisting community members most in need. Now it's just a matter of making the most worthwhile, responsible, accommodating choice about how to make that investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person to speak, please.
Mark, Glenn, Patricia Moore.
I've been here on the,
Would you please move the mic so we can hear you? Thank you.
okay, my name's Mark. Okay, I've been on the bulb for over 20 years, and there's no way that I would be able to expect to move out by some immediate date into a trailer, because I couldn't do a trailer. I can't do a trailer. I'm not going to do a trailer. Nobody's going to do a trailer. So so nobody's going to spend any money on a trailer, because that wasn't a good deal. I can't believe they actually went into the trailers the last time they did that. They actually went into the trailers, that's what I was saying, but no, nobody's moved into the trailers. I would just say now there's no way we're moving anybody's, I would not move into it. I couldn't do that. But what those people had in mind, so I'm sure would take it in the right direction for me, and so that's not an option.
Thank you.
Hello. I think Mark is absolutely right. Trailers is not it. That's, it's just not going to happen. Like in '99, it didn't happen. Why should it happen now? I mean, how can I be convinced that it will? Okay,
Thank you.
Please state your name.
My name is Patricia Moore. Good evening. Yeah, I agree with Mark. I don't think anybody's going to move into the trailers. First of all, you be separating us from our dogs. And our dogs, to us, they're our life. They're our children. They're family. They're not like baggage that we can put in a storage locker. I personally have a dog who's a problem child, and she would get in trouble, and it would not be good, because I can handle her, and she loves me, and she's fine when she's with me. Separated from me, and she would not be fine. I think that we've implemented possible solutions, i.e. Berkeley Food and Housing. Give them time to do their job. Maybe they will. But if we pull the rug out from under it all now, then it's all for naught. And all this has been, energy and time is for nothing. What Berkeley Housing and Food has done to try to, because I believe that they're on the border of trying to succeed. So give them time. Let them succeed. Let us stay out there until we can find suitable housing, because I don't think these trailers are suitable housing. I don't think it's going to work.
Thank you.
Guess I'm next to the line. I'm Edward Bennett, and I've read carefully the proposal that the staff and the council of Albany have put forth, and I think it is an excellent effort to try to solve what we now know is a long-standing problem on the bulb. That if this is carried out as it should be and as planned, it will then ultimately lead to the incorporation of the bulb into the McLaughlin State Park. And this has been on the books for more than a decade, and it's something that should happen now. So I thank you for the effort you put into this plan already, and I hope you will not be deterred. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening, Mayor and Council. Robert Chasty. I just wanted to say first, I thought the staff did a lot of work on this, and I'm really pleased to see the amount of thought they put into it. One of the things that we have urged this city is to make sure that there's guaranteed everybody who is willing to accept a bed, that there is a bed for somebody, that nobody goes onto the sidewalk. And I think the city has gone a long way to seeing that happen, and in fact, I have confidence that, in fact, that is the city policy. They've laid out the effort to create the portables at the moment, as a way of making sure that that happens with the expectation based on the feedback they're getting, that that would accommodate all the people willing to accept a bed. The other thing I would say is that there have been some discussions that I've had with some other people about maybe coming to some kind of a settlement with everybody out there. And I think that'd be great if we can accomplish that. And I'm willing to put in some more effort to see if we can have a better meeting of the minds so that we have voluntary compliance. I'll certainly be willing to put in the time to see if we can do that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm Norman LaForce, and I've been the Sierra Club leader now for 30 years on East Bay shoreline issues, and particularly the creation of the McLaughlin East Shore Park. I'll try to be very brief because I've already spoken. I think the staff has done an excellent job in putting together an excellent proposal for beginning the process of removing the campers and getting them into locations that can provide them with the kind of services they really need, and to ultimately result in the incorporation, as Mr. Bennett and Shirley Dean and Robert Chasty have indicated, of the bulb into the East Shore State Park, which has been a longstanding commitment of all the communities along the shoreline and all the communities, and particularly the environmental community. So I look forward to you approving this and going forward with this, realizing it's a long process. As Mr. Chasty's pointed out, we stand ready to try to work with everyone involved to reach an amicable solution to this issue and to reach a solution that gives us the park while also providing services to those who've been out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francesco Papalia. I was one of the starting members with the Homeless Task Force. And I am concerned that this plan just won't work. And I do appreciate the staff's work that they put together in their budget, but it's incomplete. I would ask you to look at this and say, would you approve this kind of a plan? Would the Planning Commission approve this kind of a plan with no actual plot plan? Where are the people going? How is it going to affect the other users down at the park? What are the real costs that would be involved? And so it's, I think you need to be, if you want to implement something like this, you're going to need a little more clear planning and let the public know what's exactly going to happen, because we can't tell from what you've told us. And I'd like you to give us an eventual cost to transfer this property to the bulb.
Thank you.
Final cost with all of the things that are necessary. Thank you.
I'm Brian Parker. I'd like to speak in favor of the staff recommendation. I think we have a growing problem on the bulb that, the fact that we've really haven't faced this before is facing us now with the cost that has run up. And although it's way more than I ever thought it would be, I think it's the minimum that has to be done to be humanitarian in nature, and also to provide an amendment, alternative for people who are asked to leave that's consistent with constitutional requirements, because we can't ban the existence of homeless people. We have to give them some place to go, and I'm sure that's been described to you. And I think that a lot of people won't take the city up on it, but I think it's appropriate that it be on the waterfront near where they are, and it will make the people who stay have access to social workers and social services during the daytime, and they'll need the hands-on help to take their next step in their lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Luis, and I was the manager of the modules in 1999, and in one word, it's totally failure. So if you want to keep your image, you better don't do that, because it will be totally failure. We have to use intelligence, means to discriminate what is good and what is bad, and only take the good. So you keep your image good. Other is your duty is to serve people, not to turn the back on the citizens. That's what you exactly doing. And so the thing is, that's it. You want to do it again? It's up to you. But I recommend you to be intelligent and discriminate what is good and what is bad and only take the good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I have Eva Bob Otis? Are you Megan? Yeah, you're up next. Eva Bob Otis, Catherine Sutton, Bobby Anderson, and Forrest Logan. And Kristen Lobos and Ann Miley.
I think everything that I was going to say has already been said before, but I just want to comment on the people advocating for this to become a park and the immediate eviction, and comment on them saying that this is a great assistance that you're doing. And I think providing the funds is a great assistance, but it needs to go the right way. And putting it towards something that has failed in the past and that we know is going to fail again, and the people that are supposed to benefit from it are here to tell you that it's going to fail and it's not going to be something that works to help people that get housing that want it. I think you should vote for the housing subsidy alternative that's been outlined by advocates, people that actually know what their needs are. So if you're really trying to help, I think that that's the way that you can actually have this money go to a good use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm from the Berkeley Free Clinic, and I would just like to read a statement of opposition that we have and just comment on that. So the Berkeley Free Clinic opposes the continuing eviction of the City of Albany residents from the Albany Bulb and the forced displacement of these citizens to Berkeley and surrounding communities. The council, in fact, the City of Albany, you have the opportunity to spend this money to find more long-term housing solutions, housing options, rather than the traditional housing in trailers. Trailers did not work in 1999, as other speakers have said. And already people have said this, but forcing Albany residents out of their stable community on the Albany Bulb is traumatic, and not finding a more long-term solution will strain the already highly impacted social services in Alameda County. It is the opinion of the Berkeley Free Clinic that the Albany Bulb eviction is equivalent to eviction from low-income housing. Trailers are not stable nor long-term housing.
Thank you.
Hello, Council.
Move the.
Hello, Council. How are you doing this evening? I just want to say thank the City of Albany for recognizing their tent community and dealing with situations accordingly. There's some things and issues that's here on the bulb that's very important, that I keep telling you over again, that with the self-sufficient environment that gives humanity justice. Albany should be very proud again for their tent communities. There's a new word that goes with transition, and that word is deliverance. There's a deliverance from God with the transition, from people dealing with their self-sufficiency and responsibility, that they're not in the streets and running wild when God can deal with you. This deliverance and transition, Albany should be very proud of. I want to thank Albany for staying firm, City Council for staying firm and not being ruffled your feathers and looking at this situation and dealing with it accordingly. And please look at it more in a spiritual way. And Francisco, please put it in God's hands. It'll be okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Otis, an Albany resident. I know that you are proceeding in good faith in a way that you think is an appropriate and suitable way to go. I respectfully disagree with your approach. And I'd really just like to make 2 points. Well, there's a third now. But the first one is that there is really no reason to rush. The East Bay Regional Park District is locked up in litigation on the Bay Trail and beach restoration project through at least next March, and there will be appeals regardless of how the court rules in that matter. So they have plenty of things on their plate. There really is no reason to rush. Secondly, this issue is bigger than all of us, and it's certainly bigger than the petty squabbles that we have engaged in Albany for many years, and of which, frankly, I concede I've been a part. I heard the presiding judge of the Alameda County Superior Court today talking about the fact that as people are pushed out of, or as the state responds to the requirement to release people from prisons, this problem is going to get much bigger. Sorry I'm out of time, but if I may say just one more thing, I welcome the comments of Mr. Chasty and Mr. LaForce about trying to resolve this in some amicable basis, and I certainly look forward to having an opportunity to see that happen and participate if possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Forrest Logan, East Bay resident. There's one place in the entire state of California that I know of that's like the Bulb, where people can feel safe, who are homeless, who don't have houses, that they can have some sense of community, some sense of safety. There's hundreds of miles of coast that people can go and hike on. Now you're taking away their home that they've had, that they've built up for over a decade now, and I can be damn sure that if anyone here had their home taken away, that whoever did it would be in cuffs, and that's because you're wealthy and politically connected. These people are not wealthy or politically connected. But they're asking, just for one meager thing, they're asking for a little bit of time to get back on their feet after you destroy the one thing that they managed to build up for themselves. And if you can't do that, then I don't know. I mean, you should do that, and then you should, after that, keep pretending to be a progressive city.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Ann Miley, again, Albany resident. I think you can see that this is not going to be the same as 1999. First of all, you've gotten to discover that you didn't meet your housing element, which is different from what you discovered in 1999, what we all discovered this time around. And it would make sense for you to use the funds that are available, especially now that you know that there's no rush in proceeding with something that's been worked on since 1960s, but still the situation's changed. You have a different constituency now. Your leadership is called for in a broader sense, and the money allocated to finding long-term solutions to this would both go toward meeting your housing element shortfall and also to having something that you don't have to repeat in another 4 years, which there's every indication you will. Now you have citizens of contiguous Albany joining with people on the ball, which is different from 1999. So please rise to the occasion. We need you to. We need leadership.
Thank you.
Hi, Catherine Sutton, Albany resident and Sierra Club member. And I have to say, I like most of you as people. But when I read about something that happened in Israel, where the Israelis decided they were going to just take the land that some Palestinians were living on because they wanted a golf course, I have to say that it reverberated. So I hear somebody saying the McLaughlin State Park is something that must happen now. I see absolutely no reason why. Here we have people who have screwed up their courage to come tonight and address you, people who have homes. It's a complicated situation, so really I beg you, as I asked you earlier, look at that, take the alternative proposal, give the people time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I celebrate the Palestinian people.
Hello, my name is Kristen. I'm an Albany resident. I spoke at the last city council meeting, and I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I wanted to sit quietly in the back. But once again, I've sat through almost this entire council meeting without one person getting up to speak about addiction or substance abuse. And I'm the mother of an addict in recovery, and I'm part of actually a very large organization of mothers all over this country, mothers of addicts. Many of our children are missing and they're homeless due to their addiction. So I really have a personal opinion that we can't talk about homelessness without discussing addiction, or addressing it, or having it involved in the topic. Just let's talk about it. Not one person wants to bring it up, and I'm not really clear why. I feel a little bit like I'm in the twilight zone. Have you had an addiction expert? Or do you have addiction experts as part of your organization that's trying to help people on the bulb? I mean, have you talked to addiction doctor? There's a huge recovery community in the East Bay. People get well. Let's help people. I know homeless encampments that are drug-free in Europe, or people who live on the bulb willing to say we'll have no hard drugs if you let us have a beautiful art community. I just would like it to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gordon McCarter. And if you have speaker card.
Hi, Gordon McCarter, Albany Housing Advocates. I would just like to reiterate a couple items. First of all, the no hurry issue, and this is a very long-term project, getting the state park. I wholeheartedly agree with it becoming a state park. One of the reasons we're not in a hurry is because Norm LaForce has put a lawsuit against the park development. So I think, we have time. 6 months of shelter that you're proposing with these. I must congratulate you. I really appreciate your grabbing the problem, and you're getting more and more involved, and you're finding out it's going to take more and more resources, and so I appreciate that. And you're getting closer to what we need to do. But the trailers, as you've heard, are not going to work. And I think the gist I'm getting, the feeling I'm getting, is that they're kind of a cover. The way the people from the park advocates are saying, look, we did what we can, we gave them beds, then that's all we can do. What else can we do? And we all know that these bunkhouses are not a realistic solution. They're only temporary. They're going to be in the same place where they were to begin with. They're just to make us look good temporarily. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Sanger, Albany resident. I, for one, am actually fairly encouraged by this whole process. The discussion that's taking place now is not the discussion that was taking place 4 or 5 months ago. It's not the discussion that was taking place a month ago. So I'm encouraged by seeing movement on both sides, by proposals coming forward. I'm encouraged by the fact that there is a conversation taking place, that we're willing to spend resources, where people are willing to listen, and we're willing to take the time. I'd like to concur with what Bob Outis says, that there isn't a complete rush in this, and I think that if we were to take another month or so, that wouldn't be horrible. I understand the attractiveness of the alternative proposal that OSHA put forward, but the numbers I can't see add up. He said $250,000 could be saved, and I just don't see that amount available in the budget. I like the idea of getting written agreement from the residents that they will leave, and I agree that long-term occupation of the bulb is simply not viable. But I really like the idea of people signing and saying that they do commit to leave by some time certain, whether it's a year or 6 months. To have that in writing would be a big help. And let's take another month.
Good evening. My name is Rochelle Nason, and I wanted to address the issue of time and numbers because we have heard a few people say there is no rush. Back in 2007, when the enforcement of the anti-camping ordinance was first suspended, there were fewer than 10 campers on the bulb, according to Berkeley media reports. At the time of the census, 3 years later, there were roughly 30 people, according to the census. When you made your decision in May of this year, there were, according to camper reports, about 52 people. And today there are, as Amber Whitson said a little while ago, 64 people and counting. And I wanted to point you towards the issue, towards what has happened in Seattle, where a very similar set of circumstances, 80 campers, a decision to put 500,000 in. Very soon you had 130. I take just one moment more. I would like to urge that you take a few days for, because time matters, but give a few days for the proposal that has been made to be modified to address the city's concerns, which currently it just does not. There's nothing there to stop the growth and begin to reverse it, which is the city's core concern as far as parkland is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? If not, we'll bring it back to council. And with your permission, we received a letter from East Bay Community Law Center and Homeless Action Center over the weekend and in our packet, and with that were a large number of people urging that we go with that proposal. So I sat down with that proposal and ended up with a number of questions about it. And what I'm going to do for the council is first, basically I'm pretty much going to quote from the letter and then give you my questions. The plan proposed by East Bay Community Law Center and Homeless Action Center is interesting, presents numerous beliefs of the signers. While the goals, like those in the city, are laudable, sometimes our beliefs don't match reality. The timeliness of the proposal is troubling to me, given that the council decisions were made May 6th and September 3rd. One has to wonder why the proposal was not presented in May or September. City staff and HP personnel have spent numerous hours since May researching various elements needed to help people get housing and services. For example, in August, one staff member, actually Penelope, related information that she had received after a visit to animal services provider. And as she said, Isabel's been working on this for 18 months to 2 years. So it's not a case of we rushed to do this. Censuses of bulb residents have been conducted at various times by numerous individuals, and that was alluded to. Questions about methodology suggested or not suggested and legality of various parts of the plan need answers. Specifics, especially as relates to funding sources other than the city's funding, need to be included. Quotations from the proposal and questions relating to them follow. So I'm going to say, I'll just say quote, unquote, and then my questions. Quote, identified current residents would agree to leave the bulb no later than 6 months from when the plan is approved, unquote. What is the methodology to achieve this? Who will be responsible for ensuring the outcome? East Bay Community Law Center, Homeless Action Center, the city, others. How can the outcome be guaranteed? Quote, but whether they got housing or not, within 6 months of approval, they would be gone. Again, what is the methodology to achieve this? Who will be responsible for the outcome? How can it be guaranteed? Quote, the money that would be saved in our proposal could be used to provide direct housing assistance, according to the several agencies we have consulted, unquote. What are the specific sources of all cost information? Quote, we believe the money could be used to leverage additional funds that could be used for rapid rehousing, unquote. What funds specifically? What is needed to qualify? What is the rate of success in achieving them? Quote, the dormitory-style trailers proposed by the city also have significant health risks for the bulb residents, unquote. What doctors have given this diagnosis and on what was their diagnosis based? Quote, in our proposal, the city would commit to do two things, and this is the second thing. Leverage the city's investment with other programs and grants that may be available through our sources, other sources, unquote. What specific programs and grants are available? What is the rate of success in achieving them? Quote, if in 6 months there are bulb residents who are not yet housed, we would propose any unspent monies be used to move the residents into short-term housing. But in any event, these residents would not remain at the bulb, unquote. What methodologies would be used to achieve this outcome? Who would have responsibility for this outcome? Quote, it might be possible to leverage additional dollars from county healthcare funding streams, unquote. From what specific county personnel did this idea come, since both city and BFHP staff independently got the opposite answer? Quote, although we don't have confirmation, it might be possible for the city of Berkeley to provide needed infrastructure for the provision of services, unquote. With whom have you spoken about this possibility? Can you get a commitment in writing? Quote, further, it has the potential to avoid a confrontation that could result if people are involuntarily removed from the bulb, their homes destroyed, and their possessions taken, unquote. What kind of confrontation and from whom? Whose possessions are being taken and by whom? Quote, people for whom housing was not found would agree not to return, unquote. How would this be achieved? Who would be responsible for this outcome? Quote, new people would not be permitted to take up residence on the bulb, unquote. How would this be achieved? Does this entail unequal and therefore illegal action? Quote, people who remain would agree to work to clean up their campsites, and when they leave, would assist in removing the traces of their footprint that are left, unquote. What is meant by people who remain? What methodology would be used to get agreement? Who would be responsible for getting the agreement and the action? So, as you can see, I have many questions about this plan. I also am one of the people who was around in 1999, and we did, I believe, have a humane relocation of the people at that time. I personally went out to the bulb to where the food was delivered into the portables. I would be happy to have lived in one myself. They were very, very clean, and people were given a choice, and as some people have said, some people chose not to. We all have to make a choice on what we want to do. That's our individual priority. While any plan probably has flaws, the city's plan does include significant research. Staff resources, specific resources have been identified and are available. If any parties to the alternative plan can find specific permanent housing for people on the bulb before the city leases the portables, if the council approves the staff's plan, I'm sure that we would welcome the opportunity to facilitate that housing. In 1999, people had a clean, healthy environment in the portables, and they had food. The city's current plan offers this as well as storage of personal facilities and housing for pets, which I think is really important. As a pet owner, I know how important pets are, and I think staff has worked very hard to try to help with the pets. And it also, the plan offers the possibility of permanent housing. We included that element. So I personally feel that when you weigh these two plans, that one plan has a lot of research behind it, the other plan has a lot of beliefs behind it, but I haven't seen enough specifics to feel that I could support that second plan. So, does anybody else want to speak?
I just wonder if people are suggesting stuff, whether the staff has an idea, even if we approve this or not, whether there's a way to work with some of the community people that have said that they would want to talk. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do this plan, but there might be ways to do two things at once. I don't know. I think people have come forward to talk to you about possibilities, but I do rather agree that there's so many unspecific things about how the plan, the proposal would work that I can't get a handle on what it really would mean in terms of who, what and where, and it's a little bit nebulous for me. So that's where I am right now.
Anybody else? Do you want to say?
Say a few words. I liked that the letter was so conciliatory, and that, sort of the bar got maybe closer to what the reality of in terms of a timeline. But as Mayor Thompson pointed out, there was just too many open-ended things going on in that proposal that it was kind of faith-based. A lot of we believe this will happen, or we think this may happen, we hope this will happen. There's just no way to kind of say, yeah, here are the parameters and this is where we're going to go with it. If something like that could be achieved, then I think council would be amenable to it, but we're not seeing it. And one final word, we hear so much about this is not going to work, this is not going to work, this is not going to work. If I was living out of the bulb and homeless advocates and attorneys were coming up and saying, you're not going to have to move, or other people kept repeating this idea that, you can't live in a trailer, eventually it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, if you're convinced it's not going to work, it may not work. But we are making the best effort, and staff has put together a plan that I think can work. And I think if members at the bulb, take that extra effort, take a chance, this could work out much better than some of the predictions I've heard tonight.
The other thing, with my own background in public health that we haven't talked about, and I really appreciate the one parent who spoke about this, is that, there's a real risk of tuberculosis infection the way things are set up at the bulb right now. And also the methamphetamine dependence, which is very high. And we're really offering people a chance to be clean and sober and to work on the struggles with addiction in a safe environment.
Okay, first of all, I would like to announce that I am not a member of the Sierra Club. I have had many harsh things to say over the years to some of the members of the Sierra Club about how things went out on the waterfront over the years. But my concern about the bulb and what I saw happening on the bulb in the spring is not conditioned at all on me wanting a park there right away. My concern was that the bulb was spinning out of control, regardless whether there was going to be parked there a year or 2 years, 3 years, whatever. So I have struggled, believe it or not. I spend a lot of time thinking about the bulb, usually between 4 and 5 in the morning when I wake up and can't get back to sleep, and sort of run all these scenarios over and over again through my head. And I also know some of you folks out there who have fresh ideas might find this hard to believe, but we've really been struggling with this for 6 months. We've been spending a lot of time. The staff have been having all-hands meetings almost weekly about how to plan, how to deal with the bulb. So I just wanted to let you know that. We're very lucky to have our staff. They've done a good job. Now, kind of following up on what Kristen said, I believe that was her name, there's kind of an ugly truth I want to discuss with you. I have a reasonably good background in social services. I spent a few years working for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services on all sorts of programs. I grew up in Alaska. Believe me, this gives me a little bit different perspective on things than some of you folks who grew up in the lower 48, because life was a little rougher up there. And that'll factor into what I have to say later. While I was in Alaska, although it was a conservative place, there's a lot of oil money around, so we kept funding our state psychiatric hospitals. Many places got rid of them in the 70s and switched to that federally funded community health model that the feds ended up not funding. So I worked as a male aide. I got to know and love many human beings who were really different than all of you, and they were even really different compared to some of those people on the bulb. But when I've seen the movies of people on the bulb, I recognize some of the way they act and some of their features. So what I'm about to say doesn't come from a lack of sympathy or a lack of dealing with people who are different than you or me. But I have struggled a lot to informally read the patch, talk to people, get kind of a sense of what really the bulb is about. The bulb, as far as I can tell, is about 50% methamphetamine addicts. And one of my trouble with Ocean Newman's plan is that I think the bulb population is very heterogeneous. There's a lot of people who have different kinds of problems. And people who have problems are often more unlike each other than you and I. So there needs to be some acknowledgement of the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room here is substance abuse on the bulb. And I don't know how anyone could miss that. You go out there, there's broken hypodermics all over the place. Although, you know, maybe it's a little cleaner than it was. I don't know. I haven't been out there in a while. I haven't felt safe, frankly. So here's a question for the staff. Operation Dignity, can you please tell me with the trailers what the rules are going to be in regards to alcohol and drug use in the trailers?
No alcohol, no drug use.
Okay, well, that's going to be a problem. And I think for those of you who say, well, a lot of us aren't going to go into the trailers, you know, I think you're probably right. But I think the trailers are a good idea for a couple of reasons. Let me tell you with my experience living in trailers. I spent 2 summers when I was a young man being a track laborer in the wilderness areas of Denali Park, where I lived in trailers, you know, gang cars that were moved off onto sidings. And these were little shabby plywood little trailers built on top of train tracks, on top of, you know, flatbed type cars. And you know, I got used to it, except for the one time when we got moved and I spent a couple of months sleeping on the ground outside of the section house in Wasilla, Alaska. And that was a time when, just my Alaska story, okay. We got snowed on in June. There was ice on the mud puddles in July. So it was kind of a rough life. And so I appreciate that some of the bulb folks have a rough life out there. I think those trailers that are going to be down there are going to be way better than what I lived in for 2 of my lives, 2 of my summers when I was a young man. And I think there's probably, here I'm guessing, 2 billion people on the planet whose housing is substandard compared to those trailers. So I think you have to be a little bit realistic here. I mean, if we were offering rooms in the Hilton, we'd probably get a higher participation rate, but that's not going to happen. I think the trailers are a good idea because, unlike OSHA's plan, we explicitly deal with the pets and the dogs. And this has been something that was important to us from day one. So people will move a few hundred yards off the bulb into trailers. They will be warm, they will be dry, there will be showers. They will have food supplied to them. They will have toiletries supplied to them. Their dogs will be there. They can take their dogs during the day out and have them with them on the bulb, just like they do now. Let's get clear. The current bulb citizens have every right as a citizen to spend time on the bulb during the day. The only issue is we don't want people there at night. So that's what's going to change. If people want to live in the trailers, take their dogs out, run around the bulb during the day, that's fine. Leashes would be nice, right? Okay, let me wrap it up. In sorting through this, talking to our lawyers, trying to figure out how to do all this, the easy way for me to summarize the legal issues are, you're talking about 3 constitutional amendments. Now, I was not trained as an attorney, so there's a lot of you who took constitutional law when you were attorneys, so you know this better than me, but we're going to briefly go through the 4th, the 8th, and the 14th Amendment, okay? 4th Amendment, unreasonable seizure. You can't just go out on a place like the bulb and take people's property and burn it or throw it away. We have to have a procedure for allowing the people on the bulb to have their property intact. So we're going to do that. We have agreed for them to store their property for free for 120 days, and that's part of the plan. Yes? Okay. Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. We feel like we cannot kick people off the bulb and kick them out onto the streets. So we have devised this plan for trailers. You know, the bulb is not that much of a haven. How do I know that? Because historically, during the winter, once the rain comes, the bulb population goes down. If the bulb was a haven and life on the streets in comparison was horrible, the population in the bulb in the winter would go up as people moved off the streets onto the bulb. In reality, the opposite happens. The population goes down in the winter. So this leads me to think the bulb really is more of a summer camp of sorts. It's not really a haven. So I think we have an obligation to not put people out on the streets in the rain, so we'll have trailers for them. I think the trailers, to me, are acceptable. You know, yeah, maybe there's some issues. We'll have to build some ADA accessible wheelchair ramps or something. That's not a problem. The catch here is the 14th Amendment, right? Equal protection under the law. And since I think OSHA's legal team is having trouble with this, since lawyers like hypotheticals, I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Okay, imagine the following scenario. OSHA and the attorney, Maureen Sheehy, go out on the bulb with a very competent, decent police chief, and they say, okay, it's time for us to selectively pull some people off the bulb. And let's say it came to pass, as the three were walking around, that they said, well, you know, there's African-American people here and there's white people on the bulb. We want you to cite all the African-American people and leave all the white people on the bulb. And our very competent police chief would say, that's discrimination. I can't do that. That's illegal. In fact, that's precisely how the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause came about, because after the Civil War, there were discriminatory laws put in place in the South that had separate standards for, say, criminality, for crimes for white people and black people. All right, so now let's make the more reasonable example under this hypothetical. Let's say OSHA's out there with the partner from Kilpatrick Townsend and our police chief, and they say, we want you to let the people who OSHA knows and have been here a long time stay on the bulb, but we want you to kick out anybody who's new. Now, first of all, this is really tough for a police department to try to sort out human beings out there on the bulb and figure out who's been there for a while and who hasn't. Very problematic. It's not really workable in practice. But secondly, I think what our very excellent police chief would tell them is that I can't do that. That's discrimination. You can't discriminate against people based on how long they've been living out there. We have to have equal protection. We have to have equal treatment under the law. This has been our big problem. Rochelle Nason, months ago, who's an attorney, suggested sort of a plan where maybe we could let the old-timers out there stay and we could sort of keep new people coming off. Just as this plan suggests, let me quote you the sentence. Quote, new people would not be permitted to take up residence on the bulb. My stance is that's illegal. You're asking us to do something that we think, that as far as we know, is illegal and discriminatory, and we can't do it. So we had to devise a plan that allowed us to clear people off the bulb in a way that was consistent with equal protection. And that is the plan we've come up with. It, I think, meets a certain number of demands under the 4th and the 8th and the 14th Amendments to the Constitution. I think it's reasonably fair. If anybody out there who's in law school wants to disagree with me, I see some nodding heads. You know, I'm happy to hear an alternative suggestion, but so far I haven't heard any that meet all the demands and the issues that our lawyers have discussed with us. So I think, you know, we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. I think the plan we have is a good one. It's the one I certainly would suggest to the citizens of Albany that we vote for. However, I have one other suggestion, and that is the OSHA Newman plan is, you know, it's okay. I don't particularly like it. I don't think the voters of Albany should throw money at it, but it doesn't mean other people can't throw money at it. In other words, especially given the issue around the drug abuse problems, which are difficult for us to deal with as a city because Operation Dignity does not allow drug use in their trailers. If that's not an issue for OSHA and for the attorneys that he works with, this suggests a division of labor. If OSHA Newman wants to fundraise for this plan and find $250,000 to do it, I say, more power to you. Just because we don't want to fund it doesn't mean you can't find someone to fund it. So here's my suggestion for you, how you might want to start. Kilpatrick Townsend, that's a big, powerful, what is it? It is an intellectual property law firm in San Francisco. And let me explain how those firms work. Typically, partners try to build 2,000 hours, billable hours in a year. And, if this is a little too high, you can correct me. It's easy to scale the numbers down. This is just a model. And then let's say the billable hour rate is $500 an hour. So each partner in a law firm like that bills $20,000 a week. So $20,000, if you had 12 partners and they were each willing to give up 1 week's worth of billable hours, that's $240,000 right there. So you're most of the way there to already funding your plan. Now, there's an extra $10,000 left over. Well, there seems to be a lot of people in this audience who are very favorable to this plan. So I suggest you guys can fundraise the other $10,000. Then OSHA gets his $250,000, and we can work together. We can do our part. If there's people who are falling through the cracks who are left over, then the very generous partners at Kilpatrick Townsend and other donors to OSHA's plan can do their part as well. So that's my suggestion.
I do want to say one other thing. Our goal was to work with all homeless in Albany, and so I just want to assure that the portables would be available to all homeless in Albany. We are not just talking about people who are living in a specific place. Thank you.
I'd like to go ahead with the motion.
You're welcome to.
I move that we approve Resolution 2013-60, allocating up to $570,000 for the Albany Waterfront Transitional Plan, which would include $35,000 housing subsidy and $30,000 for showers. Secondly, to authorize the city manager or his designee to enter into a contract with Tucker Construction for the cleanup of the bulb for up to $100,000. Authorize the city manager or his designee to enter into a contract with Operation Dignity for up to $154,000 for management of transitional housing for 6 months, and to authorize the staff to prepare a homeless transition plan on the written proposal by the attorneys for Albany Housing Advocates dated October 15th, 2013.
If I could clarify the last part of the motion, I wasn't sure I understood the last part of it with regards to alternative plan.
Well, we're basically approving the plan that we had set forth earlier with a couple of additions, and I guess for 3A, we would just be saying that in response to the proposal from Albany Housing Advocates. But maybe that, if someone else has a read on that, maybe that's not necessary since we're already approving these other things.
Yes, at this point in time, the first 3 items are full staff recommendation. Item 3A was the alternative plan
Okay.
For your consideration. So we're going with the first 3 items as proposed by staff.
Mm-hmm.
You would not be accepting item 3A.
Okay. Then I'm only making my motion for the first 3 items.
Okay, and $35,000 for the subsidy and $30,000 for
showers.
Showers.
With respect to the $35,000 housing subsidy, there would need to be also an authorization to the city manager to enter into any rental agreements within the scope of that budget. So that therefore the housing program can be implemented right away.
Okay. I agree with that change.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil and seconded by Councilmember Barnes that we approve Resolution 2013-60 allocating up to $570,000, which is a little amendment, including $35,000 subsidy and $30,000 for showers for the Albany Waterfront Transitional Plan, that we authorize the city manager or his designee to enter into a contract with Tucker Construction for the cleanup of the bulb for $100,000, that we authorize the city manager or his designee to enter into a contract for a housing agreement if the housing subsidy materializes, and that we authorize a city manager or his designee to enter into a contract with Operation Dignity for up to $154,000 for management of transitional housing for 6 months. Everybody here, is there any further discussion? Okay, would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. Now, the chair will entertain a motion regarding item 4.
I move that we direct staff to bring forward a technical clarifying amendment to the no camping ordinance to delete the word loiter from the ordinance.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Wiles, seconded by Councilmember Mouse, that we direct staff to bring forward a technical clarifying amendment to the no camping ordinance to delete the word loiter from the ordinance. Is there further discussion? Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion regarding item number 5.
I move that we approve. Do you want me to?
All right,
proceed?
please, order, please. Item number 5, under 8-1. Vice Mayor Weil, you have the floor.
I move that we approve resolution of intention to amend planning and zoning code for for the homeless shelter.
I'll second that.
It has been moved by. Order, please. Council, do you?
At this point in time, the staff have presented the first 2 items and then the alternative, but in fact, all 5 items are on the agenda item for this particular item on the agenda. So you do not need to open up for further testimony. You may can on those 2 items. Have your choice.
Okay, all right. So would it be the pleasure of the council that we open up these items for further discussion?
15
Yes.
minutes.
Yes.
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. If you wish to speak to these items, will you please line up over here, and we'll give each person 1 minute. This will be item
4 and 5.
5. 4 and 5, okay, 4 and 5. If you would like to speak to item 4 or 5, will you please line up over here?
Was there some presentation about them that the staff was going to do? About it? If not,
The staff did mention both those items and describe what they were already.
so the issue was regarding the where to allow the homeless shelters, and I personally object to limiting the homeless shelters to the area that you described. I believe it marginalizes them, the people. It once again puts people into a position where we don't want to see them. I think of the CMX, is it? If that was correct. I mean, I'm not sure, because that's why I was hoping to get a little
Yes, it
clarification.
is the CMX.
Okay, so, I mean, I think that a homeless shelter or in relationship to that, we talked about having a day place, people could come in, a drop-in center, that you should be addressing that issue as well, and make it, as was addressed on San Pablo Avenue, that was a proposal. So I would wish you to provide for greater opportunity for placement of a homeless shelter or a daycare center, a drop-in center.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue?
Bob Otis. Mr. Bond was quite candid that the only reason the CMX district was chosen was because he thought it could fly without a lot of conflict with property owners in San Pablo or people who were concerned about San Pablo. This is another example of a disingenuous effort to cover over the fact that you are 14 years out of compliance with your housing element. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this?
Yes, I'll take just a moment. Tony Sustak of Richmond. I happen to sit on the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Contra Costa Transit Authority. And I can tell you from reading the documents that we see month after month after month on housing reports that there are a whole lot of places that are way, way behind on what their housing requirements are under the Association of Bay Area Governments Housing Needs Assessment. It isn't just Albany. I can point, for example, to one of the reports that we read at the City of Concord, where in the course of a 2-year reporting period and over about 6 years, they had 2 new units approved, and they were for upper middle income housing units. So Albany is hardly alone in that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? Okay. Seeing no one, we will bring it back to council.
I just want to clarify that item number 5 is approved resolution of intention to amend planning and zoning code for a homeless shelter. Mr. Papalia included the word drop-in center. Personally, I have no problem with saying a drop-in center in one of our other neighborhoods like the San Pablo corridor, but that's a drop-in center is not what we're discussing tonight. I hope we can discuss that in the future.
A little clarification. We could do some kind of drop-in center on San Pablo, but it would require a conditional use permit, is my understanding. And what we're doing now is picking an area where we wouldn't have to have that kind of permit.
Yes.
I think what this does is change it from a conditional use permit to a permit by right.
Right.
Okay.
That's absolutely correct.
It makes it easier to set it up.
It does not preclude San Pablo Avenue.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion regarding number 5.
No, you need to take action on number 5, which is resolution number 2013-62. The motion then would be to adopt if the council wants to proceed with a resolution of intention.
It was moved
We're
and
making-
seconded.
I need a motion for number 5. We've done every other one.
It was moved by Vice Mayor Weil and seconded by Councilmember Moss.
That we
number
proceed.
5.
Yeah, so we have a motion.
You know what I would do, though, since you heard testimony, let's start with the
Yeah, I think we need to start over.
I move that we approve resolution of intention to amend planning and zoning code for the homeless shelter.
And I'll second that.
Okay, it has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil, seconded by Councilmember Moss, that we approve resolution of intention to amend the planning and zoning code for a homeless shelter. Will you please poll, well, is there further discussion? Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. Next item, please.
8-2, Public Works Service Center, report on property acquisition and direction on options for financing and construction of building improvement.
Why don't you go live in trailers? Talk about bathroom.
Staff recommendation that the council, provide direction on modification of
And
the...
would you wait just a minute? Let's let people.
When I first got on the committee, all you had to do was submit a plan and all the other paperwork. You didn't have to do anything. That's now changing.
Yeah, thank you. All right, now would you go ahead?
Public Works Service Center, report on property acquisition and directional options for financing and construction of building improvements. Staff recommendation that the council, one, provide direction on modification of the soil contamination contingency for the acquisition of 540 Cleveland parcel. 2, approve a modify option 2 concept design for the facility layout. 3, conceptually approve recommended funding source for the facility development, including LLAD 88 revenues, general fund revenues used for the existing lease, and new revenues from a lease with Clear Channel Outdoor. 4, direct staff to initiate an amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow a Clear Channel electronic advertising sign on I-580. 5, conceptually approve the design build public facilities construction method and direct staff to commence drafting an ordinance to enable this method. 6, direct staff to prepare a request for proposals for soliciting design build development firms. 7, authorize staff to prepare a request for proposals for design firms for the preparation of specifications for the new building. 8, direct staff design firm to analyze the feasibility of solar panels for the facility as part of the specification development.
Please.
So Mayor and Council, this item concerns the replacement of your existing service center, which you see pictured here on the PowerPoint. As you heard from all of those various recommendations that Ann just set forth, there's a lot of moving pieces to this project. So what I'm doing tonight is to update you where we are on this project and also ask that you give direction to staff on a number of issues that need to be pursued in order to bring it into reality. So we're currently in a facility that we're leasing. Our lease expires in January of 2015. We're in space that's inadequate and poorly arranged. We could continue to function there, but we would need to sign a long-term lease to stay there, and staff does not feel that that's a good use of your resources. It would be better, similar to owning your home, to start paying for a facility that you would ultimately own. The council has been looking at this issue probably for a couple of years now. Some alternatives that have been examined include taking a portion of the Pierce Street parcel that was bought from Caltrans, the part that would not be part of the park. As you can see, this is adjacent to a residential neighborhood. It's probably not the best from a land use compatibility standpoint. It's also a fairly tight site, and so it's constrained. The council also looked at the 540 Cleveland parcel, which is the subject of most of tonight's discussion. That became available, and the council entered into a purchase agreement about 9 months ago, and we're in the midst of that agreement now. It's in an area that's far more compatible from the standpoint of adjacent uses, which you can see here. The 540 Cleveland building is shown by the arrow. That building is now actually gone, but it's sitting in an area of similarly industrial properties, and so it doesn't have that incompatibility of land use. And you also see to the left of it where the existing facility is. So there are a number of contingencies that were involved in the acquisition agreement, and I wanted to bring you up to date on where we are in satisfying those contingencies. We're satisfied that the condition of the title and the soils will allow the building, the new building. The existing building has been demolished by the property owner. There's been quite a bit of work done on the toxic remediation, which I'll go into in more detail. We need to have some kind of sign-off from the county before we close escrow. We need to have environmental insurance put in place before we close escrow, as well as a CEQA review, and we need to satisfy ourselves that there is financing available to build the new building. On the remediation issue, this is probably the most complex issue and time-consuming. On the right of this slide, you'll see the parcel and the areas that need to be excavated in order to remove soil that is contaminated. Those areas are shown in the tan and orange boxes. That work will begin in the next few weeks and should be completed in November. And that will be done by the property owner at their expense. And then we need to enter into a period of 1 year to do groundwater monitoring. When we first set up our acquisition agreement, we didn't realize that it was going to take an entire year of groundwater monitoring. So we set up a tighter schedule than that. And we don't feel that it's necessary to wait 12 months in order to get through the groundwater monitoring process. We think that there's a way to close escrow earlier with a soil completion letter from the county, and that's, you'll see that is a recommendation there noted in the brown. You'll see in this diagram the same diagram that has the contamination excavation areas in the tan and orange, and then you'll see overlaid on top of that in blue the footprint of the building that is proposed to be constructed as the new facility. And almost all of the excavation area is outside of the building footprint. So in other words, it's in an area that it will be yard or parking, with one exception that I've noted there with the arrow. We have talked with the county, and they have assured us that they can, at the completion of the soils excavation, they can give us a letter that says no further excavation will be necessary, and in particular, they will call out that area that is underneath the building footprint and tell us, as part of their letter, that no additional excavation would need to occur there in the future. So what happens with the groundwater during is the county is looking for a downward trend in the contaminants, that they're self-attenuating, which the types of chemicals that are in the groundwater will do because they're oil-based, and so they'll go away over time. If for some reason, unlikely, but if for some reason those readings did not fall or they actually went up, two things might happen. One, the county would ask for additional groundwatering for another year or 2 years. The worst case is they would require additional excavation. So if that worst case happened and we were to go ahead and close escrow before we had the no further action letter, the excavation that would need to occur would be in areas that could be dug up without affecting the building. And the cost of that could be taken care of by a $1 million environmental insurance policy, which is provided for in the purchase agreement. The owner has to provide that to us. It's for a 5-year period of time. So we feel like we have that contingency and risk pretty well bracketed.
Patrick?
Yes.
What do we know about how this building was used in the last 5 years? I mean, there could be an old plume that's moving down, but as long as there hasn't been fresh contaminants coming in every year for the last 5 years, you'd think the plume would already be diminishing.
Yeah, it won't diminish actually until we remove the soil, which is the source of the contamination to the groundwater. So as soon as, because that soil is contributing to it, as soon as that soil is removed, then we should see a drop off in the water. So probably by the first quarter of monitoring results, which will happen in January, we should start to see the beginning of that downward trend.
Okay.
So that's it on the toxic contingency. Now, in terms of the development plan, we need to, as part of the contingencies to close escrow to acquire the property, we need to satisfy ourselves that we think we have a viable development solution for the new building. So there was some prior work that was done by the architectural firm Burks Toma, and this was done in late 12, early 13. I think the council looked at this, and they had two alternatives on the 540 Cleveland site. On the left, you'll see a larger proposal that has about 17,200 square feet and two buildings. In the middle building in the blue is the shop space at about 6,700 square feet. The building on the right is about 10,500 square feet of office. And we feel that that solution is probably more square feet than we need, more space than we need. And we think it's an inefficient and more costly solution because it has two buildings and more exterior building space that has to be constructed. And then if you compare the two plans back and forth between each other, you'll see that there's less open yard area in option 1. So staff is recommending option 2, which has less square footage to begin with, is a more efficient building design, has larger area for yard space. And we know from our discussions with the school district, who for a while had expressed interest in co-locating their service facility with us, after we gave them some preliminary numbers on the cost, they responded that they didn't have the money to follow through on that desire. And so we know immediately that we can reduce the amount of square footage from this option 2 by 2,000 square feet. So that's why we're calling it the modified option 2. So we had 3 cost estimates. I won't walk through this complex chart. It was in your packet. Where you see the arrows is where you want to focus. The most expensive estimate was from Burks Toma at $6.7 million to build the building and improvements. That doesn't include land. And I think that's probably equivalent to what a public bid process would result in. And then you see the yellow and the green proposals are 2 proposals from private development firms who would do what's called a design-build method, and we would turn over a set of requirements to them in the way of space and facilities needs. They would then design it and build it for a guaranteed maximum price, and we would know that going into the agreement with them that that was the maximum we'd have to spend. And at the end of the construction period, we would then enter into a separate lease agreement with them, lease it for 25 years, and at the end of 25 years, we would buy the building for $1. So you would have lease payments for that period of time, but you would end up with owning your facility at the end of that period of time. And those are considerably less. Those are $1 million to $2 million less. So then the question is, do we know we can finance it? So we have a contingency in the purchase agreement that we wanted to satisfy ourselves that we had the money and would be able to do this. And the proposal that makes most sense to staff that we're recommending to council is that we blend together 3 sources of funds to pay for this. The top line is $180,000 that we're currently paying for the lease facility at 548 Cleveland, and we would recommend that you continue to commit those funds for this purpose. The second line is the Landscaping and Lighting District 88 funds. Those, about $240,000 of that district was committed to debt service to pay for the community center construction, and those bonds have been paid off. So we're not recommending the entire $240 be committed to this project, but rather just $80,000. And the balance of those freed up monies could go towards landscape maintenance. And then there's a proposal to lease a small portion of the 540 Cleveland property to Clear Channel for an advertising sign. and that could bring in anywhere from $120,000 to $180,000 a year. I just picked the midpoint in that range as the assumption. I think that's a reasonable assumption. And the total of all those sources are $410,000 a year that could be committed to the lease payments. So then if you capitalize that at the bottom at a 25-year lease term at a 5% interest rate, which is about market right now, that will yield a building of about $5.8 million. So if you go back to the prior slide, we had costs that ranged from 4.6 to 5.2, so there's some cushion there with 5.8 million. So in other words, you have the funds to be able to build the building. On the ad sign lease revenues, it will take two actions that are noted in brown there in order to make that happen. One is that we would need to negotiate a lease with Clear Channel for them to place their sign, and secondly, we would need to amend our zoning ordinance to allow the placement of the sign, and both of those are recommendations that show up later in the recommendations section. In regards to the design build method, this is different than the traditional method whereby the city would design the entire project and then put it out to bid and take the lowest bid. This is a method that is now recognized in state law. There's a section of law pertaining to general law cities that allows this process to be used. It should save us time and money, and it will allow us to use that lease purchase approach that we wouldn't be able to do with a traditional bid approach. In order to implement this recommended method, we would need an ordinance to allow it. Secondly, we would need to solicit developers in an open RFP process. And third, the key to this, the negotiation with the developer to make sure that we end up with the facility that we want, is to have a good set of design specifications that we turn over to them as we come to agreement on the maximum guaranteed price. So we are recommending doing an RFP for an architectural firm to develop those specifications. So I have a much longer and detailed timeline in the staff report. I'm just summarizing very quickly here that we should have the toxics cleaned up by December. We should be able to waive those various contingencies I just walked you through also by December. We should have the soils remediation letter to allow us to close escrow from the county in January. We can then close shortly thereafter. We would get the design build developer in place and the ad sign lease documents put in place in the first and second quarters of 2014. That would allow construction to start in the third quarter of 2014, so that's the fall of 2014, allowing construction to be completed approximately 1 year later. If we wait until all the groundwater monitoring is done before we start, you would have to add a year to that time schedule. So, final slide, the recommendations, again, they're in more detail on your agenda, but just summarized here, there's 8 of them, and you may want to combine some of these into a single motion, or you may want to take them one at a time, whatever works best. So to approve the close of escrow on the basis of the county soils completion letter. Number 2, to approve the modified option 2 concept plan. Number 3, to approve the financing plan with the 3 revenue sources. Number 4, to initiate the zoning ordinance amendment for the advertising sign. 5, to approve the design build method and initiate the enabling ordinance. 6, to initiate the design build request for proposals. 7, to initiate the design specifications request for proposals. And finally, to request a staff analysis of solar panels for building an ad design. And I didn't go into that in my presentation, but that's covered in your staff report under the sustainability section. So that's my staff report. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Questions?
If the lease is up in 2015, what do you do if this isn't done till the end of 2015?
So we'll have to negotiate a short-term amendment of the lease to take us out. I mean, if we'll try our best to get back on schedule. It will kind of depend on how the toxic remediation goes, but we may end up having to go to the property owner and ask him for maybe a 3 to 5 month lease extension.
And it sounds like he would do it. You think after we've been there?
Well, we'll
that long?
see. He's been difficult to deal with. But
Right, I know.
I hope so. So the
Yes.
better thing to do is to try and get back on schedule with this.
And back on schedule would be we would finish before the lease is up.
Correct.
Okay.
Do you know why there is, the Burks, Toma, and Oliver, both, their cost for shop building was about 1.6 million, whereas Ganell was about 500,000. But then when it came to yard and parking, it flipped around and they were in the 200,000 and then Scannell was in the 650,000.
Yeah.
Why is there that discrepancy, do you know?
I think Scannell just allocated his costs differently in his various categories of expenses. And I had to, in order to be able to sync all these up, they were all different pro formas. And so I had to summarize in different ways. And that was the best I could do with Scannell. And that's why it comes out that way. Overall, I think their proposal, though, in terms of the magnitude of costs is in the range. It feels right.
Then the other question is, will staff look at the various proposals, and are you going to go with the lowest bid?
No, actually what this will be is that the council will approve who you finally decide to select. We'll have a staff recommendation for it. But one of the advantages of doing this method is that you don't have to go with the lowest bid. Mm-hmm. Instead of the lowest bid, you're doing the open solicitation process of developers. So if you happen to like one proposal that costs more than the other, but you feel more confident about the experience of the developer involved, or the design of the building, or a variety of factors, then you're able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm sorry, run over the term of the lease payments again. What's the annual amount for how many years?
So what I'm proposing here is that you would have $410,000 available for lease payments, mm-hmm. and that would yield a building value of about $5.8 million.
You're just capitalizing
I'm just capitalizing that income stream. So if it turns out that your building is actually $5.2 million, then your annual payment would be less than $410,000.
Mm-hmm. So that depends on the interest rate, but 5% is pretty standard for...
Yeah, it depends on the interest rate, and it depends on your lease term. So those are things that we would need to negotiate with the design build person. So if, for example, the costs come in higher, then you might have the ability to go for a longer lease term to offset it. So there's some ways to move that around.
Are there any other questions? Is there any comment from the audience? No one wants to speak, then we'll bring it back to council.
I move that we...
Oh, there's a public, except he's not here, never mind.
I move that we approve the staff recommendations, items 1 through 8.
Second.
Could I ask that you amend that to separating out 3 and 4 so that they can be voted on separately? And the reason is, I'm old enough to remember when billboards were considered blight, and cities across the country removed them. Then in the 90s, some firms did a lot of fundraising for politicians. And now we have billboards that are lighted, so they're also a safety hazard. So I can't bring myself to vote for them. I would like to abstain from those two items.
So we'd be voting on 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I'd appreciate it.
Okay. That's fine.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Is there further discussion? Then it has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil, seconded by Councilmember Barnes, that we provide direction on modification of the soil contamination contingency for acquisition of the 540 Cleveland parcel. We approve a modified option 2 concept design for the facility layout. that we conceptually approve the design, build, public facilities construction method and direct staff to commence drafting an ordinance to enable this method, that we direct staff to prepare a request for proposals for soliciting design, build, development firms, that we authorize staff to prepare a request for proposals for design firms for the preparation of specifications for the new building, and that we direct staff design firm to analyze the feasibility of solar panels for the facility as part of the specifications development. Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes.
Aye.
Councilmember Moss. Vice Mayor Weil.
Yes.
Mayor Thompson.
Aye, and the motion carries now.
I move that we conceptually approve recommended funding sources for the facility development, including LLAD-88 revenues, general fund revenues used for the existing lease, and new revenues from a lease with Clear Channel Outdoor. And item 4, direct staff to initiate an amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow a Clear Channel electronic advertising sign on Interstate 580.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Been moved by Vice Mayor Weil, seconded by Councilmember Moss, that we conceptually approve recommended funding sources for the facility development, including LLAD 88 revenues, general fund revenues used for the existing lease, and new revenues from a lease with Clear Channel Outdoor, and direct staff to initiate an amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow a Clear Channel electronic advertising sign on 580. Is there any further discussion? Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes.
Aye.
Councilmember Moss.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil.
Yes.
Mayor Thompson.
Abstain, and the motion carries. Next item, please.
Other business, reports on meetings attended, announcement of events, future agenda items.
Is there any council member who has an announcement? Seeing no one, the chair will adjourn the meeting in memory of Mary Wallman.